having a camera off for now, so it's all good.
We are live on YouTube. Are you mute?
No. Hello. How are you? You look so good. This is working. You can unmute yourself. We're just chatting before the program is not live. There's like a, yeah.
Actually, we are.
How are you doing?
I'm going crazy.
You know, Berlin is not taking it seriously anymore. I'm just so shocked how people are just like, have you been to Neukölln lately? It's like,
No, I haven't. I have barely left my house.
in Neukölln, it's like traffic as usual and everybody's running around. And it's like, it doesn't even feel like there was a crisis.
Are you living in Neukölln now, Mo?
No, I'm in Mitte.
Okay.
But, you know, sometimes you go places and
Yeah, I have not gone anywhere because I was hospitalized with pneumonia last year. So I was like, okay, I don't want to get this thing.
it's a serious thing.
Yeah, it's a bit. I mean, let's see what happens. Let's see what happens now. Hopefully, it doesn't pick up again.
I was just talking to one of our members in Singapore, and she said that it went down, and then now it went up again, and then the Prime Minister extended the lockdown to 4 more weeks. So it was supposed to end in mid-May. Now it's going to end in mid-June because numbers went up again.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm scared of. That that people are just jumping the gun too much. I mean, and I'm terrified of what's going to happen in the US.
But Julieta, I know like Berlin treated freelancers and unemployed people really well, but in Canada, you call a number based on the month of your birthday, you give a couple of things, and then they just direct deposit $2,000 in your bank every month until this is over.
Nice.
It's not socialism, but it's okay. It's nice.
I mean, like the universal basic income, yeah?
Yeah, but, you know, we want universal basic income and outcome, which means services, right? Like, you know, give us some money, but also give us free hospital, free education, free, you know.
We want outcome that is not in the form of Amazon.
Yes.
That's also this thing that is terrifying. Of course, I have ordered a ton. I mean, I've been very scared of going to the supermarket and things like that. So I have used Amazon a lot, and I just keep thinking, this is like, I just like keep thinking of Jeff Bezos getting fatter and fatter, like just like taking over the world. And
you know, a lot of people will get fatter. I was just reading how it's been the best.
No, I mean like metaphorical. Jeff Bezos getting metaphorically fatter. That's what I meant.
No, but I was just reading how bicycle manufacturers and stores have had the biggest like surge because everybody's switching to bikes to exercise and basically kind of now go to subways. All over the world, bicycle sales are like up like this.
I am guilty as charged. I bought, I mean, I've always had a bike, but I bought a cargo bike.
Yeah, well, you had one of those like super cute vintagey like Berlin bikes, I remember. And now like you
No, but now I have one of those that looks like, like the middle-class parent.
Yeah.
Where you put children inside.
Yeah.
Or else sell bread. So I have like a giant cargo bike now. Because I mean, and it's like, it's supposedly kitas are open for single parents, because I'm going crazy, yeah? Like I'm really going crazy. So supposedly kitas are open for single parents as of next Monday. But you also, I mean, I'm also okay, like I can go and drop Leon somewhere else, but it's
You don't know what Leon's gonna pick up and bring home.
exactly. So I don't know what to do. I'm kind of like
You know, I'm the worst person for this situation because I'm already hypochondriac, but I'm very much interested in forensics, right? Like I'm like always like, so
Don't send him to the kindergarten. Stay
no,
home.
don't send him to kindergarten yet. Just wait.
yeah, no, I'm gonna wait 2 weeks. I'm gonna wait 2 weeks and see if cases pick up or not, because
When this, you know, I was in Moscow in mid-February. When I arrived in Moscow airport, like the racist woman kind of like couldn't believe that this face could be Canadian with all these travels in. So they suspected my passport and they put me to the corner. I had to wait there for an hour. And I was the only person without a mask. And I was so sure that I'm gonna get it in a Moscow airport. Of course I didn't. But I've been kind of social distancing since I got back, since like.
Same for me, because I was in Indonesia in February. So I was in January and February, I was in Indonesia, and I got to see the beginning and how they were cutting Chinese tourists. And I was traveling through Singapore and getting like screened and temperature taken. And I traveled back in February with a mask, and I came back with tons of masks. And I have not sent Leon to the kindergarten since fucking February. So
yeah, so what I was gonna say was, when I came to Berlin and people were not careful, I was like super careful, right? Super careful. And also like, I totally like if a person walked by, I just waited for like 30 seconds before I walk into the direction. And my friends were like telling me, what are you doing that? I'm like, these particles takes time to go down. And of course they laugh at me, but now all the latest data that comes totally supports my forensic. It's like,
you know that I have been making masks. You know what happened to the masks that I made for you?
Yes, you dropped it in the neighbors.
Yeah.
That yeah, no, I've been making masks for people and for like social service, you know, like homeless people that work with homeless and so on. But yeah,
For people who here, we're just waiting. We're still like 10 minutes ahead, so we're gonna wait for some of the people to show, and we'll basically begin on sharp because it's gonna be a long day, long event. So we have to just like compress it and keep it to like point. But this part is not even recorded, right, Castro?
It's on YouTube, but
Oh no, but we edited later. Yeah.
we edited it later, and we haven't started recording it on our.
No, we haven't recorded on our account, yeah? No, not yet. Okay. But it's live on YouTube right now. So just so you know.
And like 10 people.
And 10 people are watching this like very personal like exchange. So yeah. You know, like okay, that's a pin video. I don't know what that is. So yeah, so I hope to see you soon somewhere. And same with Adnan. Adnan, how you doing, man? Your microphone is muted. There we go.
Hey, I am getting out of my cave recently. I had a family issue during all this process. It was very difficult since last December. Like, this is private, but I have some family members, and trying to cope with this reality in a very very special space and time, because you can't really relocate your feelings on anything. You cannot hug your friend, fly to your mom, or just self-destruct with a lot of rakı and meze with friends. That's not possible. So every day you wake up with the same pain, and you process in a very different way. So for me, there's only Monday and Sunday. Like, there is no Wednesday or Friday. It's either a Sunday or Monday. Either I need to be in panic and do stuff, or I just don't want to do anything. And I was very supported with my friends. So I'm thankful that I kind of feel very privileged being in Berlin, taken care of by friends. So I just try to be a little bit useful and feel alive. So thank you, Mo, for pushing me to host this together, because actually I'm getting out of my cave now, slowly.
Well, yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, I guess like we can just say a few things. For us at the news center, nothing changed. We were always online. We continue to be online. So for us, work is just continues, even got more intense because people have like a special needs, and a lot of people are basically becoming members to access the archive and all that. So it's like really, it's like overtime work for me. And I just stay home. Hello, Kimberly. Look, your mic is mute, but I'm sure you know how to, you've been using Zoom a lot, right? So.
Yeah. Hey. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good.
I don't think you need introduction, right? You know Julieta and you know Adnan, right? Yes.
Adnan! I haven't seen you in ages. Or we
Yes.
saw each other for a second, but we haven't talked in ages.
You know,
Yay!
it's really weird how the screens arranged for everyone, but you know, some of the people I know I see here, some are in the second screen, so I don't know, but right now also yeah, it's a grid screen, right?
Hey,
It's a screen.
Simon.
But some
Oh,
people
Simon.
yeah, Simon's here too.
Hi, Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hi, Julieta. I can see you now.
Yeah, see, that's
my
what I-
God, this
yes.
person, I have not seen you in a decade.
Lovely. I love this.
A decade, and now you guys are meeting on Zoom.
But Simon, your microphone is muted as well. So.
Yes, your microphone's muted, which is okay, but if you want to speak, hello. Everybody knows everybody, right? Simon, do you know Kimberly? Of course.
Hello. I need more light, yeah?
Yeah.
Even though it's really bright here.
Yeah, well, it's an automatic like a light meter, so it just adjusts it according to the way he wants. Well,
And then I'm also not so fat, you know, camera shows you more.
you look better like that.
Wonderful.
Well, we have a lot of interesting people who have something to say about the role of art and creativity in this crazy moment. A lot of contemporary art, but also we have like people like my friend Amr from London, who is a video game developer, and he's actually going to explain. He's worked on a pandemic game a couple of years ago, which kind of like is relatable. Reza will join to kind of like chat with you at 7. He really wants to talk about video games, and I told him about you. So Reza will join around 6:30-ish to talk to you. And yeah, so.
Oh, fantastic. Hi, thanks for
Oh,
inviting
yeah,
me.
for
Really
sure, man.
appreciate it.
Nice seeing you. Are you home? Still?
Yeah, I'm home. I'm back in Scotland, actually. Just to let you know, I'm not liable to talk about the pandemic or anything about the video game that we worked on.
Oh.
Just that, yeah. But I have lots of other content to talk about, you know, fine art and game technology and how we, how we can learn from
your
it.
company, okay, you talk. I thought maybe it was a full okay, but I guess it was a
Yeah.
conditional okay.
Yeah. So.
Tell me about it. Okay, so let's just take 4 more minutes and we begin, because I would like to start with Simon for a particular reason, and Simon's here. And then if
Yeah, I'm just getting some more light.
no problem, there's 4 more minutes or 4 or 5
Yeah.
minutes. So just I'm gonna go get a glass of water too.
Yeah. Is that working? No.
Hello. Hi, Simon. How are you?
Good. Yourself?
Thanks so much.
I should go and get a Billy Apple for my background, yeah?
You have something, I am sure.
Yeah, I'll go get one, yeah?
Go and get one.
Yeah.
Hi, Klaus.
Hello.
Hey, Klaus.
Oh, hi, Kimberly.
Hi.
There's a Adnan. There's a Billy, yeah?
And the cider.
A matching color.
Where are you now? In Vienna?
I'm in Vienna. I have to be in the kids' room because my study has no door. And then when they come home, they always run in, but in their bedroom, I can shut the door. So that's actually a New Zealand alphabet in the background. You know, A is for Aroha, B is for beehive, C is for, yeah?
I
Hanging on the
love the
wall.
flags.
Yeah. W is for wahine, yeah.
Are you in New Zealand? Are you in New Zealand?
Me?
No, I'm in Vienna.
Ah, like
Yeah.
me.
Ah, okay, hey.
Hey, where you at in Vienna? Where are you? in Vienna?
Rustenschaka Allee. Yeah.
What district is it?
In the Zweite, next to Prater.
Right, I see.
You know, where the Skulpturstudium from the Academy de Bildende and the
Yes.
Möbelstudium from Angewandte.
Okay.
Ja, an dieser Straße, ja.
Klaus, how did the crit cross go last night?
Pretty well. Pretty well. It was interesting. About 25 people was our first online crit cross. Crit cross is a forum on art criticism I've been running in Vienna for 2 years now with Verein K, and yesterday we took it on Zoom. And the themes were pretty similar to what we are doing here tonight.
Yes, I think we inspired you. No, I'm kidding. And sorry I couldn't show up. I had so much work to do.
No, yeah. Yeah, it was maybe, I mean, it was pretty obvious that we couldn't do a normal crit cross, just choosing like, you know, 3 texts and discussing these texts only. And so, yeah, so it made sense to do something that's more on topic on like art world in the epidemic, but mainly people from Vienna, even though it was on Zoom. So it was.
Okay, so it's 5 o'clock and we got a lot of like a lot of people here. I think we can start. What do you think, Adnan?
Yes.
Okay, so just like before we go fully live, I'll just tell you a little bit about the first few minutes of the program, and then it's going to be like the format where we discussed on the emails, right? So I'm going to just begin with some like sort of like introductory words which are needed for people who watch the video later, and then I'm gonna basically talk about just the frame of the discussion, and then Adnan will basically talk about the content of the sort of like a curatorial or editorial that we put together. And then I'm going to basically talk about few housekeeping notes, and then we begin right away with Simon for very short announcement, and Simon will stick around. It will be amazing to see him talk to Maria, if it's possible, about institutions and all that. And then so yeah, so that's how we go. I guess it goes from, then we go from Simon to Maria, and then the discussion kind of like goes on to I see Clementine here, I see a lot of people here, so then yeah, we can just like open it up a little bit. And but it would be good if you have something to say, it would be good to sort of like 5 minutes, just your point. Otherwise, question and comments. And also there's a chat box here, and it's called basically, it's called chat, right? You can chat me, but I would prefer if you chat Kasra, who's the administrator or the moderator of the technical side. If you have any concern or questions, or if you want to talk later or earlier, just let Kasra know, and then we kind of like here switch people around and make sure everybody gets to say something and make everybody is comfortable and can contribute and benefit from the conversation. Okay, so we're gonna go 3, 2, 1 and begin very soon. Just need a little bit of silence to be able to edit this later. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 5th session of Sheltering Places, Thinking the COVID Pandemic with the new Center for Research and Practice. This session in particular was organized as a result of a conversation between me and my great friend and colleague, Misal Adnan, a curator from Turkey based in Berlin. And we thought about kind of expanding a philosophical and a theoretical and political conversation that began 5 weeks ago in a marathon session of 4.5 hours. And we immediately thought we should do something with artists and curators and basically art professionals and thinkers that more specifically deal with the relationship between this new world we live in and the field of creativity in general and contemporary art in particular. So I would like to ask, maybe Adnan can kind of like expand on this and explain what type of like stuff we're thinking.
First of all, I really acknowledge your practice. I see the new center, all this work as part of your practice. Like Julieta is here. We know that Iflux is like means so much for Julieta and Anton, like as an extension of their practice. So first of all, thank you, Mo, and thank you, New Center, for hosting this. This was a collaborative form of thinking. So we connected different people in a very short time. So I want to make 2 announcements, maybe in a form of apology. First of all, if we have irritated you with email saying, please prepare your presentation, give us 5-7 minutes. This is after a lot of thinking. Let me explain. I have been witnessing what has been happening with sheltering places with Mo and his team. I was amazed how you would like to listen rather than talk. And in all these sessions, how people were more hungry, thirsty to hear from each other, because this way of sharing information and insight was very special. So in the first session for 3.5 hours, it was for me really nice to listen rather than talking. So we framed it, let's work on our listening and hearing skills, like the act of listening and hearing becomes meaningful. So basically, nobody is responsible for bringing any content as long as they don't feel comfortable. Nobody is obliged to do anything. This is just collectively thinking together. For those questions we have rendered for you after a few weeks of sleeping over them. And basically, when you see those questions, of course, the one with cyberspace and public space are more concrete fields that we can come up with more concrete proposals, because I don't know if we are going to talk about if reality is better than fiction. Maybe there is those questions are more like brain openers or inspirational notes, but I think there are some directions. So let's use this 5 to 7 minutes efficiently and as much as possible hear each other. Simon is here. I don't have the capacity to bring the full practice, but he knows very well. Maori people have mananga and mana as a form of gathering. And in these gatherings, first hearing each other becomes a very important discussion. Like in the same context with Turkey, if you are in a village, they circle around the room and ihtiyar heyeti, you hear each other and discuss the meeting. So this is like an open forum and everybody would sharpen their thoughts and ideas. So one from another, let's hear each other. This would be the concern. Secondarily, thank you for everyone here, but specifically I want to say thank you to Manal. Manal is with us from a very special part of the world, and I would like to hear also at a meaningful point how she feels comfortable about isolation, because her practice is divided between Ramallah and West Bank. So I would like to also not talk so much because I would like to hear as much as possible, like soft moderating maybe. I'm very curious to hear you more. I was a bit hiding in my cave because of some family case in the last week. So thank you also again for pushing me into this. I'm very excited. I want to chill with you guys and I want to really hear each other and I want to discuss all in a harmony. Let's start with Simon Mo.
Yeah.
Thank you, Adnan. Yeah.
Just before that, I just wanted to say that this is our 5th session. We're going to take a break next week. There will be no sheltering places next week. And I think we might call this the conclusion of the COVID-19 series, but we are going to continue the sheltering places as a weekly gathering with different themes and concerns every week, or maybe just no theme and just deal with contingencies and stuff that happens both in the world of creativity and art, but also in the world of social life and also politics, like how we basically manage things. So next week there will be no shelter in places. The following week, I am organizing a series of online conversation, 3 of them in a row, from mid-May to late May, basically beginning on May 13th, on Wednesday, probably around the same time, 13th, 20th, and 27th, with Cosmosco Foundation, where Simon Rees works. I think I would just let Simon describe what we're doing there. And yeah, so 3 weeks in a row will be those conversations with artist curators for Cosmosco. And then we return in June to sheltering places with different themes. We're hoping actually to have like public program around Berlin Biennale, but we don't know what's going on with that right now. So we'll see if we can tie in something with them. But yeah, so Simon, do you want to take over?
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Adnan. Hello from Vienna, everybody, though I'm speaking from a perspective in Moscow and the Cosmosco Foundation. I'm here somehow in promotional mode, but I have also been channeling into the conversations in the past weeks. So as Mo said, I'm here to quickly describe the forthcoming discussion platform, Artistic Cosmos, World Making and the New Normal, which is presented by the Cosmosco Foundation in collaboration with the New Center. Now, the Cosmosco Foundation is dedicated to building capacity within the Russian art scene, encouraging the development of artists, curators, and young culture managers through discourse and dialogue, including by building bridges between the scenes of Moscow and wider Russia and the world. I must say that for decades, general publics, or what we most often call audiences, have divested themselves of imagination and creative impetuses for the sake of a consumerism, ceding all rights to the world of imagination and world making to artists. It's a tragedy, I know. And hence the theme of Mohammed's projects with us, world making and the new normal, which I love. That said, in recent weeks, we have all been forced to reconstitute claims on our own consciousness and the collective consciousness, which I hope still exists, and make worlds in our respective homes and living spaces, and find ways of telling about them to outside worlds. So please join us, as Mohammed mentioned, on the Wednesdays of May 13, May 20, and May 27 to discuss the New World Horizon. And we'll be principally in conversation with the artists Katya Novitskova, Kirill Savchenkov, and Simon Denny. So Mohammed and Adnan, I thank you, and I hand back the Zoom, and I think we're going to segue to Maria Lind. Hey, Maria.
Yes. Yeah, so thank you, Simon. I think it's going to be interesting. What we're hoping to do is to revisit these conversations, either in person in Moscow or with another series of conversations 3 or 4 months later, to see how the world has evolved in this 4 months. So the very same artists and people invited to the first 3 sessions will be invited to the second part to contemplate and look back at their claims, their predictions, their, speculations, basically. That's kind of the idea, to basically revisit the same questions 3 months later. We might do something similar to that. Also, I wanted to say that my interest in world making had a lot to do with a fantastic event at Efflux this last winter. You know, those lovely days when you could pack in upstairs in the Efflux room and listen to lovely conversation. And they were like, Patricia Reed, Reza Negarestani, and JP Caron had a really interesting conversation on world making, which I then picked up, and I started to read Goodman and other people, and I really thought this would be a great chance to kind of like continue that conversation from that lovely Efflux evening, always ending with great food and dinner and drinks and everything, and we can just dream about those moments right now. So basically I just had to give credit to this lovely event that Efflux put together that basically put me in this trajectory. Maria, thank you so much for your time, for joining us. I don't know where you are. Are you here in Berlin or are you in Sweden?
Hi there. I'm in Sweden on a small island in the Stockholm archipelago. I'm privileged enough to have a small cottage here that my grandparents built in the 50s. And if I need to be in self-isolation somewhere, this is definitely my favorite place. And as the schools are closed in Berlin, it was possible also to take my son here so he can do homeschooling from here.
So I guess you left before the borders were closed and all that.
Well, they were kind of closed for planes, but we took the land and sea route. So train to Rostock, ferry to Trelleborg, and then train to Stockholm.
Amazing.
20 hours.
But it feels good to be home.
Well, in a way, this very place, this little island, is more home than anything, because I've moved around so much in my life, and this is the one constant in my life. So it's really the place where I know every rock and almost every tree.
So if you allow me to ask, what are your because now we're in a 5th or 6th week or 7th week of the, what were your immediate thoughts as someone who's been responsible for artist institutions at an international level? What were your original thoughts that came to your head, and how those ideas have changed already in 6-7 weeks? And what do you think how this will impact institutions of contemporary art and institutions of art in general, even like other museums who have classic art?
So first
can I have just one little note there? Because I think for someone like me, I would like to make it clear that this question is really thinking of Mariela. What is coming? I mean, one of the questions is what is coming in regard to structural change in public space and audience circulation in regards to exhibition making and formal publics. I don't know any other person to ask this question. Sorry, Maria, for putting you on the spot, but this question could depart with you, to be honest.
Yeah, let's see how we can talk about this all together. My first thought when the restrictions came in Berlin was something that Mark Fisher said when he did a talk at Tensta Konsthall. And a few years before he passed away, he was diagnosed with cancer. So he told us at this symposium that his first thought when he got the diagnosis from the doctor that indeed he had cancer was a feeling of relief, and then thinking, finally I can rest. So in the middle of this horrible news, he could at the same time feel that this would be a chance for him to stop being productive, to stop performing, and a different stage was reached in his life somehow. Eventually, it turned out he did not have cancer. It was a false diagnosis. But anyway, this is what I felt also. Finally, time to stop for a bit, to pause things and to think things through. And when we say that this is a unique experience, I think we have to qualify from what position we speak. You know, maybe it is so for myself and for a number of you in this conversation, but in other parts of the world, for sure, there have been many more, even more disrupting experiences over the last few decades. So it is special, but it is perhaps not totally unique for everyone. So this being said, the factor of time, I think, will be dealt with differently from now on. I left Tensta Konsthall a little more than a year ago, so I'm no longer responsible for an institution. The only institution I'm affiliated with at the moment is Konstfack University of Arts, Crafts and Design in Stockholm, where I'm a guest lecturer at their curating program called Curator Lab. So what I see immediately, and this is what I guess most of us have observed, is that people are expressing this forced situation with time in ways which indicate that there is this is a moment to reflect on where we're at. With a place like Tensta Konsthall that I was running as the director for 8 years, I know that it's having immediate consequences in terms of funding, for instance, because it's tied to certain activities that actually cannot happen at the moment. Luckily, the entrance is free, but for institutions depending on entrance fees, it's disastrous. We know also that many of the major museums, particularly in the US, are laying off people. So what I would like to see happen more is to think about different rhythms in terms of how much we produce and at what pace we produce things. And the fact that that which is nearby, that which is close at hand, can become relevant in a different way. This is something we know from the 60s and 70s, dig where you stand. You don't have to go to the other side of the world to find interesting issues. You can actually look at your own backyard. So this will obviously also be emphasized in the near future for the good. One of the questions you sent was to do with the role of the screen and this kind of socializing that we're involved with at the moment. I find it surprisingly good. Also teaching situations that I've experienced over the last month and a half. So I think we can use it much more under more normalized circumstances. And if I think politically of the Nordic region and how art schools over the last decade gradually have gone to become more and more provincial, in the sense that in the early 2000s, they would welcome professors from elsewhere, not speaking the native languages. Since around 2010, there is this tendency to only want to employ professors who live in the city where the school is located, and that they need to speak the native language or understand the native language. So what we can really show now is that, no, you don't have to be present all the time. You can really do qualitative teaching this way as well. So it's a combination of the two. So I think we can shift the balances between what is happening in the flesh and what is happening on the screen.
Yeah. Well, Maria, you remember that we worked on an online education program for the Guangzhou Biennale, and those videos are still being seen and used. Also, I remember this lovely remark by Julieta in Manuel Correa's Art Offline film, where she kind of hinted at this, like this need to be in presence, and there's nothing wrong with experiencing art in print or in screen or experiencing events on screen. And that was a very important, like, brave comment for Julieta in that film, because almost every other artist in that film talked about the primacy of the physical presence and being there, and the phenomenology of being in space. And Julieta was the counterintuitive person, saying like, oh, well, you know, whatever, it's okay. My memory of all the great art I know is from the art history books, and there was all images and was always mediated. So yeah, so I guess there's a little bit of like consensus going on around what you're saying here, because of the kind of work we all been doing. And eFlux is also like an online institution. I hope Lauren from This join us soon, because this as a film platform, I guess these days, the curatorial platform, it's also very much engaged with like sort of like majority of the activity happens online, right? Yeah. So Simon, what do you think? Do you want to jump in, or should we ask Hito to join? I think you might have something to say about points that Maria brought up.
Yeah, I mean, I must say, Maria, you mentioned other times in history and time. So physical threat was not present in either the global financial crisis or at the time of the Icelandic volcanic eruption. But from my position in Lithuania and the CAC at that moment, it felt quite synchronous from a working perspective with those two passages of the mid to late 2000s. You know, on the first Monday of 2009, all staff at the CAC at a certain level got a letter from the Minister of Culture saying, you either take a 33.5% pay cut or you have 2 month wages and there's the door, you know. Directors of the organization that I work for, we've all taken, the 4 of us have taken a 50% pay cut to buffer the experience of the younger staff, yeah? When Iceland happened, we had people trapped all over the world, artists couldn't, so we all collectively made a set of decisions to, Julieta, you may have been in Mexico City for the project Raymundus have done when the Icelandic eruption happened. You know, we had people caught there for 6 weeks from the CAC staff and artists who were supposed to be coming back for exhibitions. So there is a commonality with previous moments. And I think that's something that Maria said, which is very valuable, you know?
I agree and disagree. Sometimes you also want the whole world to stop. And I mean, if the necessary content is coming, of course, we need this context. But at the same time, I don't want to be appended all the content all the time online, promotion continuing. I feel a little bit panic in terms of this economy attention, like we are still here and art is still relevant, kind of. Maybe nothing is relevant right now. Why can't everything stop? I would like to bring Cagla, my very dear friend, because today I was playing with Marta. She's 3-4 years old, and we have this 2-meter Olympics. I can do my best because Christina, her mother, is quite busy. If a couple of hours I can hang around with her, this is already a nice friendship. And Marta was saying she was very excited with the idea of seeing her friends from kindergarten on Zoom. But after she saw them, she was kind of disappointed. And I know what she feels because, you know, it's not the same thing. And what do you think, Cagla? Like, we know Leyla is so much into petrol, pulp petrol, and everyone is with a monitor now. How do we deal with this online boosting and the attention economy while we need to keep our mental space a little bit ruhig?
I'm looking at Julieta and thinking about our meeting last Friday where we had all the kids and trying to find a common network, how we deal with the news that we are going to stay with our kids till the 1st of August. Thank you for reminding that. Like, we are talking very much about how we are going to think about the art and importance, but we have a very interesting daily life, we mothers or parents who are taking care of kids. It's like another interesting issue and also it's not very in middle of the discussions, but I want to point out again, from being the mother whose child is now looking at the Paw Patrol in the screen. So, and I want to point out to 2 moments which I find it very interesting and I want to intimately share with you. The moment that I realized that this virus is going to be something very unimaginable, which we have already lived, was the moment that I was coming from Hanover, where we are now planning the cultural capital city.
There's a little interruption. I hope her video catches on. It was supposed to be a very intimate comment, right? Oh, there we go.
I was reading a novel from Aharon Appelfeld, which was telling a moment, imaginary moment of in the 30s from a city in Germany, which the Jewish community was kind of under quarantine, and how they come to this point.
I guess she's having a little bit of a connection issue.
Connection issue, yes.
Sometimes if the video goes, if the video is turned off, Maybe, Cagla, maybe turn your video off and then speak. Yeah, excellent. Go ahead.
So, in this novel, it's about how the mankind, in this case, in this German city, how the authority has managed to get the Jewish residents under quarantine, and how they didn't realize, and then how they couldn't react. And this was very important point for me to look in the past and not think that we are the only ones who are living in this epidemic. I don't want to put it in the same line, but I think we are so focused on our now on our own beings and on our own ideas. So I was always thinking about the past and understand what happened in sometimes of this breaking points in the world history. So that was for me also bringing to Heidegger's art and space art ideas. And there I remember something, clearing is releasing of places. That was for me the point where I was thinking about, okay, clearing is releasing of places. And now I'm thinking about really how we redefine these places, these art institutions that we are going to continue on running and developing and producing art. So we have to think more, I think, not going out of from art, but also the global community. So like sheltering, having now another art of collectivity. And these are the words what I'm now thinking about. Like, so.
Julieta, would you like to say a few words? You can unmute yourself.
Okay.
There we go.
Hold on a second. Okay. Okay, well, a few things, right? Now I'm going to do more or less the same thing I did before to you, but I am, but backwards. I am really suspicious about living public life in private tools. I do not want to think that the public realm has become Zoom and Skype and Facebook. It really makes me extremely uneasy. So that's one of the first things. It's not exactly about missing connectivity, but I'm missing the public part of a public realm. And this is not it. Much as I like all of the people that are in this set of screens, I know this is not it. There is also something about the kind of node that I am inhabiting, which is I'm having to be preoccupied about 3 different countries. I am very, trying to think, okay, well, so what happens to time? Time is something that has always been very much at the center of my work. So this collapse, like time has been collapsed. So in a way, I am back again at this place where I am not able to escape the demands of the kind of economy of screen dependencies. Eflux is great for that. But I also have a 4-year-old and I'm isolated because I don't have any family, and that's a kind of reality that doesn't enter into the conversation somehow. It's like, again, living this life where, of course, I am, taking yoga lessons and having 7 aperos with friends on Zoom, and my child is some kind of like an afterthought. So this kind of quarantine life is not considering these other realities. So those are 2 thoughts. And when I'm thinking about the collapsing of time, yeah, something that I find it very hard to be positive about the lockdown, because I see that it has run its course through first world countries where everybody has a functioning medical system. But as it moves through and ravages the nations that don't make it in the news, I mean, it's very hard for me to try to think of it in an optimistic way. The one thing that the only thing I'm interested in is what happens when the entirety of the planet has post-traumatic stress disorder together. And that there is something there that could be a ground for learning something. If, and this is like my own opinion, yeah, if we stop trying to find solutions. I've been thinking about Donna Haraway for the entirety of my lockdown and about this phrase, staying with the trouble, because we keep trying to rush through and find solutions. And how is it going to be after? How is it going to be later? Well, no, how is it now? What are we going through? Can we inhabit this moment? And maybe if we leave it together, we can figure out the tools that we need to do something out of it. If there is anything I would expect is that something that I call the colonization of the future could stop. This constantly trying to predict and present and occupy the future to the point that you end up with presentism because everything has been predetermined somehow. So if anything, this moment shows you how fragile that kind of occupation of the future is. So perhaps it's possible to turn, to take a turn against that. Yeah.
Maria, would you like to respond or have some reflections?
Well, I guess several of us have read what people like Zizek and Latour and Sarah Ahmed and others have written. And in the midst of all this, all the terrible things that you refer to, Julieta, I didn't think that in my lifetime I would experience something that is so beyond the status quo that I know, like, for example, and I'm now referring to Zizek, like nationalization of private healthcare in Spain, or the US government commanding industries to start producing face masks. I'm not saying that these are maybe great measures necessarily, maybe the nationalization is, but just the fact that status quo is not there, it had for a long time felt impossible. So if you look for a shard of something that can be productive, that's one of them.
I see two people in this boxes, and I'm very interested in asking Asli Mona, but also Ellen Lepper is together with someone we will be introduced, I hope. So you guys go through this as two, not as singular, but as a singular plural case. To be very honest with you, I don't know if it is a good time for being together, because I can only handle with myself at the moment. And I'm very thankful to the person I live together with, because it was very caring from the beginning. But I have my own space and I'm only going through this individually. How is it to be with someone or going through it together in one room? There are two screens, Asli and Mona and Ellen Lepper with...
Misal,
I want to jump there if it is possible.
No problem, but it would have been also good. Yeah, let's do that, and then we go to Manal.
Sure.
Ellen, would you like to say a word? Unmute yourself, please.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, we're actually really living in a very confined space at the moment. We're kind of lucky to have a fishing hut.
You guys are in Switzerland, right?
Yeah, we're in Switzerland. But I mean, like today, for example, we're not able to cook anything here. There's no, the electricity's gone out on the hob. So we're, and it's literally just one room. There's nothing else. We've got like the stove over there, and it's actually because our sublet of ours fell through because the people were supposed to go away and actually they're unable to. So now we resorted to coming to the fishing hut.
But you're not fighting more than normal, right?
Sorry?
You're not fighting more than normal.
No, and in a way it's kind of weird because you get really used to literally living in the same space as someone, almost on top of each other. But I mean, I don't know what it's like for you, but for me actually it's almost stranger than when the other person isn't there, whereas normally we're both quite independent, and now you suddenly wonder, like, where has this person gone? Like, where is he? Which I guess in a normal situation you just completely adapt to that. And yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's what you're saying is so true, because I live alone in Berlin, but ever since the pandemic, because I work closely with Kasra, I asked him to stay here, especially for those first few weeks where we weren't sure how contagious the illness is and how widespread it is in Berlin. And so Kasra basically moved in here, and the same thing happened to me, because every time he went, I felt kind of like worried and empty and like, oh my God, where is he? Did he get home? Oh my God, what happened, right? Whereas, so yeah, so I think that reflection is so true about like this idea of like going through this with someone, you become really interdependent.
There's a Facebook status I really love recently, separate joints.
Yeah, we've done that. Okay, Manal, sorry for making you wait. We really wanted to start with you because Palestinians' experience of like closure, and it's historical, and it is doubling that has happened. It's really interesting to hear what you have to say about it. So if you unmute yourself, we could actually enjoy your voice.
Now, hello everyone.
Hi Manal, I was very curious about the view from your studio.
I'm not unfortunately at my studio now, at my home, because my studio a little bit far from where I live now. I live in Haifa. And actually, I would like to talk about this familiar situation as a Palestinian, I mean, and all terms of lockdown, curfew, isolation. It's very familiar for me and for the Palestinian too, especially as an artist that live in Israel. I'm Palestinian with Israeli citizenship, but my practice in the West Bank. And what's going now returns me back to 2002. I was participating in Young Artist Award. It was organized by the Qattan Foundation. It's a prize for young artists. It turns me back to there because I moved then to Ramallah to produce and to be productive because I was part of this exhibition. And then suddenly I found myself that's under curfew. So for what I think about this pandemic, it's for the Palestinian, it's not strange situation. And it is now in this moment looks foggy and black, but I think it's not strange at all. And in the end, yes, we could produce and create art, if I can say, despite the colonial regime and despite the occupation and the lockdown, and call it, I don't know which word to use exactly, because all those words for me are the same. The same because the meaning to be stuck at home, it's very complicated. I don't know how to explain it, but what I think it's also I'm not in the rush to do and to create as an artist artwork. I think also it's a time to rethink about what's going now and to think about the art scene also regarding to virtual like what we are doing now. All of us, I think, just like the museums and the institutions, and also the artists too, felt a little bit, I think, panic. Oh, I'm not doing anything. I can't go to my studio too. But I think this is also a good time to really to be with yourself and to think about to be positive with the thoughts. Because also if we go back to the history, after many strong periods, suddenly was born and create movements. New mediums have been discovered after those black times. So, and I don't know, for me it's, I can find myself in this lockdown, let's say.
You know, the question I put on the list, which was supposed to be a conversation opener, is this, what's happening with the concept of signification and what is important, right? So from one hand, you know, all the significance in the world is kind of seems to be either focusing on COVID and COVID deaths and news. On the other hand, people are thinking a lot about like how meaningful things that we took for granted were, you know what I mean? Coffee with friends. Oh my God, I remember I went there. Oh my God, would Guangzhou Biennale happen even this year? Oh my God, remember when we, so signification is split that way. And meanwhile, in a world where the world itself is self-remaking and is so crazy and science fiction like, you know, like creativity is just like lags behind. You know, what am I gonna make right now that can compete with this super sense of nostalgia or sort of like this ongoing crisis that has sucked all of, like, you know what I mean, attention into itself, you know? So this is really, to me, is like one of, like, I have a film that I was supposed to finish for, like, this was supposed to be done like now, and I had perfect time and like space to work on it, but I really can't get to the editing thing. I just can't think about it. I just look at it and I go like, what, doesn't matter right now, you know? So that's why I sort of like I started to think of this gathering, this weekly gathering is really where my quote unquote practice is, trying to curate people, interesting conversations, interesting philosophers, artists, and bring people, because I really can't, but this itself also is part of that problem, because so far these 5 weeks, we've discussed the impacts of COVID-19, right? So I'm guilty of the same problem, right? That all I can do is either think nostalgically or think about COVID, right? And review the past years of my life. Like, I feel like I've already written a biography of myself in my head in the last few weeks, right? Because so many things I never thought about come back to me, memories I never thought about, you know? So let's also, you know, we got Clementine in a room, and she also, we just met like social distance meeting last week. She's had an incredible like journey because she was caught traveling. So maybe Clementine, maybe you want to like just tell us a little bit about like what was going on with you when this crisis hit, and maybe bring in our lovely friend Azu in conversation, because you guys were doing something together, right? When this thing happened, right? Please unmute yourself.
So, hello, very nice to be here. Quite unusual for me. I guess I try and kind of compare it to what a conference might be like. And I think immediately of places which don't have the internet, which are not able to keep that communication running, where there's real serious isolation, places where electricity runs out, which is also why I'm working on a project with Azunu Agbogu in Lagos called Generator, which he will talk more about. But what I really feel is that there's been a terrible failure in education, and we're seeing it now. I teach, like Maria, like many people in the room, I teach curating. And I've taught it now in 4 different locations in the last 3 years. So I've had a bit of feedback from different types of young professionals or people, emerging professionals. And it wasn't long ago, way before the COVID crisis, but not long ago, where I suddenly began to think, well, if there aren't any jobs anymore in museums, then curators will become nurses, genderless nurses. And more I think about museums as lazarets. I think about the curatorial challenge of trying to exhibit in a major museum, be it the Louvre or the Met, or even here in Berlin, where I sit. The small challenge it would be to curate for bodies that are no longer swiping through an exhibition, running through an exhibition, emulating the 1840s and the department store analogy to a museum, but where we're having to look after vulnerable bodies, and we're having to reprioritize the functions of a museum to create a kind of ergonomy, to think back what we do with the infrastructure that we've inherited, to kill the museum, as Omar Konaré once said. And I wonder about that, because when I look out of my window and I see the Volksbühne, or I think about the museums that are closed and the stopgap initiatives with exhibitions online and the kind of fervor to make sure that everybody knows what everybody is doing, it makes me more and more clear that we need to develop more than before. We need to be sensitive to the backstage, to practices that are under the radar, and that we have to think of media that can be, that can transmit as yet unresolved ideas. We thankfully no longer have the pressure of the mothership, in other words, the motherships, the biennial, the commodification of the museum, the residencies, the auction houses, and the art fairs. The galleries are going to have to rethink what they did. And lo and behold, they may turn back and look 40 years ago when private galleries were information galleries. And I don't need to tell anybody here what that means. So for me, there's a lot of work to be done, and a kind of listening to how the people that we trust are ready to, how far they are ready to engage in something that might not give them the visibility that they're used to, the drugs that they're used to be on a platform, to be seen, to be heard. And that's what interests me at the moment, to work on future archives for the thematic imagination of the next generations, and not to try and restore what we already have, but to recognize that institutions are totally dependent on what we make out of them. And that we hit a moment, I think, in the sort of, when you speak generalistically of the art world, generically rather, where we were just dealing with salon pompier. We didn't have any interesting work that was in an infrastructure that was curatorially challenging. Okay, you can say, I take on this biennial in this part of the world and I will change it. I will make it different. I know it will be different. The artists will be different. The way we work will be different. The economy will be different. The mediation will be different. But ultimately, why not just have created a new infrastructure at the time? Why believe that you have to go back to what already exists? Why aren't we thinking more about the cultivation in the kind of tautological sense, but literally about the cultivation of a more precise way of working within art? So I had a little bit of problems, Mo, with this kind of bundling of art and creativity. And I think there was another moment when I'm trying to look at the, it's not about that. I'm not interested in art and creativity. I think art practice is complex and it's not always there for a large public. And if there's anything to be gained from this dreadful moment, is that we need to kind of sharpen our pencils and realize who we're talking to, why we're talking to certain people, even on a platform like this, and maybe not worry about reaching a large public, and try and handle the fact that we will be more wary than before. There will be less trust in space, but also less trust in the mediation of information or intimate information. And so for me, this is a incredibly intense period where I'm working between KW, where I've just become associate curator, and my project is now in another, it's sort of like, it's got to change. In Lagos, where we were also working on something that necessitated physical space, and Hamburg, where I'm teaching students. So for me, it's a grim moment. Grim, not so much because of death, as much as borders. I think that's for me the most scary moment, is that even a small border will no longer be crossed physically. Yeah.
Simon, before we go to Azu, you had some comments. There's also like a question by Kimberly on the chat that I think we can articulate that after Simon. And also Maria had a question or a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I had written my little comment in relation to Manal, and just that it was worth thinking, if one of the most influential and critical essays of the 20th century has to be Hannah Arendt's Banality of Evil, yeah, which she writes at a certain point and extends into book form. And I think it's worth reprising this idea of the banality of, that there's an overarching common and banal aspect of that, what we're all facing today, without workplaces, without common spaces, without different things. But since Clementine spoke so fantastically, as Maria knows, because she was one of the agents I invested in to help me make this change, I was a person brought in as a change agent at the Museum of Angewandte Kunst, the MAC here in Vienna, to take it from research to audience base, yeah, and try and engage publics and make it more performative and take it away from its dusty research. And ironically, in touch wood, I may well now be engaged in the exact opposite to take it back again. Because the curator's now empowered to make shows and to make all those things, yeah? They need an independent person to make the decisions on what will be defunded, what will be cut, what will be postponed. And I might be the agent now to take it back to research and long-term publishing and less visitors and more about the deep history of collections. So, I mean, I have to agree with you, and you said some very engaging and profound things about how the museum needs to rethink itself. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'll sign off.
Kimberly, would you like to articulate the question you had? And then we go to Maria and then Azu. Also Klaus. Kimberly, you're muted still. Lovely.
I'm talking to myself again. My question, which was in the written comments, was a bit in response to Clementine, when you're just saying there's a quiet, without fairs, without the biennials, and without all of these spectacle-driven or market-driven events. But what I fear, and I've been talking to different people, I work as a journalist as well, so I'm interviewing a lot of different people around. I spoke recently to Jan Borland, and I've spoken to some artists that in terms of just speculating, it could really go either way, where we have some sort of more utopian situation at the end of all this, where this slower, perhaps more intimate way of making, producing, and also viewing art could happen. These things that aren't meant for big audiences maybe will take a more important role, or we have this machine coming back with a vengeance after this is over. And the thing that no one's talking about is we don't know how long all of this, this condition, this state of exception that how long it will last. So I always step way back and think of the macro view and also kind of the overstructural view, because I've got my fingers in so many things. And I really wonder, I don't know what the rest of you would think about this, especially those of you working in institutions or traveling a bit more. What I look forward to, I mean, there's been talk in Berlin about museums opening again, I think on May 11th, but with very limited viewer, like you can walk in and you have to be a certain number of meters from somebody else. And I don't know, I feel like I look forward to having a slower, more intimate encounter. I'm talking too much, I'll stop.
No, you're not.
Adnan looks like he wants to answer. I want to know what you think of this.
Actually, there is a link between what you are saying and between Asli and Mona there. During this time when we were all under quarantine, they didn't stop doing one thing. I don't know how much I'm allowed to share their project, but they were conceiving a new space, a mobile space for art, basically. And maybe this is all we can say, that travels, you know, and the production and the design of this process continued. Meanwhile, they were supposed to be stable, not moving that much. And they also traveled from Istanbul, from their Tarabi residency on this urgent call because of COVID-19, and they came back to Berlin. So I just want to talk more about, in these days when we are all sitting sitting, how is it to move, mobility, or kind of the relationship with the location change? Because I know you're also working a lot on the term location. And then I thought this would be a good revisit for Azu, and maybe we can slowly move. We don't need to rush.
Hi everybody. Perhaps it's good to tell you that it's a ship, yeah, that's floating on the water, and it's perhaps or it seems more utopian than ever before. It is not, because we just made it clear that it's that we will use an existing ship, and there is some minor reconstructions, and it's quite modest in a way. But it's also for us a moment to rethink scale, like scales of an exhibition or scales of publics, of course, because finally it's compared to, let's say, other spaces, it's quite confined, and obviously visitors cannot like be there as a huge crowd or so. At the same time, it also allows us to rethink what if a museum is not visited but is visiting, like an active museum, and what if it's not part of a very centralized outward, but traveling to different places and stopping by different places. And of course, it's something that is just moving slowly from here to there, but still it's moving, and that's basically for us at least, the utopian moment at the moment. While at the same time, and that's perhaps connected to all of you who are working at the university, we are very hardworking at the moment to somehow have this continuity of teaching. So everybody is digitalizing the courses, trying to set up different platforms where we can communicate with students, but especially also, and that's something I feel we have to consider as well. Students have really, and they are right to do this, they're really asking us for a way to continue with their studies, basically. And that's something that we, both of us, are dealing a lot with these days. And that's perhaps also connecting to what you asked before. We are always leaving for different rooms. We have two of them. to just talk to our university environments, because we have different universities. So it's always going to work and coming back. So it's not so different than before. Just the distance is very different. We're just moving from one room to the other and back also.
Yes, and actually we were supposed to be in Istanbul right now, but after so the distance started like with everything after the crisis, or we heard about it. We came back to Berlin, where we are now, but also while working on our ship art space, we also somehow started to discuss more about all this, as Mona mentioned, about distance, but also, as also she mentioned, about the scale. But on the other hand, another issue, a lot of, especially architects, I think it's obvious, talk about the countryside and in relation to COVID, and that the countryside may play a bigger role now, but only if there's a cultural infrastructure. So this would be the more art theorist argumentation. So it's a little bit crazy. While everything is postponed, also for us, the ship project just happened. It was just like a miracle in a way, because we also didn't know with our supporters if they would be still on the boat, let's say. But so some things go on. But concerning the postponed things, I think many of you were mentioning, Clementine was mentioning the curatorial challenge, and Julieta was talking about the collapsing of time and so on. And somehow this reminded me the discussion that Mona and I had after reading your email with a lot of questions that you have sent. So all these postponed events, what will happen? Will they be just kind of stuck on the end of the crisis, and there will be a day with 500 biennial openings, and this one day, and so there would be maybe a massive competition of attention. That Adnan mentioned attention economy. So there would be a boom of attention economy.
We will go back to normal completely through an abnormal pattern.
So what is the normal 500 biennials openings a day?
That was the dystopian part.
You know, there's also, like, let's just, like, there, of course, actually, before I say something, let's go to Maria, because Maria had some points earlier on. Maria, go ahead. If you unmute yourself, we could hear you. Thank you.
So first of all, with Latour, I just want to remind us, likely what we're experiencing is just a rehearsal of what much of the future will be like. And secondly, Clementine, in relation to what you called for, some of it can already be found, particularly with small-scale non-profit institutions that function in what we would call peripheries, and which have a very direct engagement with the locality and the people around them. I think they exist almost on every continent, and they've been running for quite a while. So if we want to look for models, there are some interesting ones out there. I'm thinking of everything from Casa do Povo in Sao Paulo, to the showroom in London, to places like Centro de Arte dos de Mayos in Móstoles outside Madrid, etc. So we should also think about what is already there, and that's my main point. There is so much which is already there that we can use and that we can reprogram, that we can use differently. in Norway and Sweden, there is this vast system of people's houses. They are part of the labor movement. Most of them were built around the turn of the last century with money collected from the workers themselves, because they were not allowed to have meetings in the existing buildings at the time. These places still exist. Every little town has one. How can they be activated? Libraries, public libraries. So to actually care for what is already there and think about slightly different uses of that.
Let's just like bring in like, I have something I really would like to put on a table, which is actually kind of started a few weeks ago when Obrist, our colleague, spoke about the COVID at a conference, and he asked for public art or public works, right? And then I had both a negative and positive reaction to it. My negative reaction was like, okay, if this means like securing like mega big public art projects by big artists who already have a lot of like share of the pie, no. But if we're thinking of, you know, beside artists who have a sort of a happening career, there are thousands upon thousands of artists that are not even, that they're artists, that they had the education, but they never had a chance, either for being too young or new in the field, or for have not been lucky enough to have a career. These people are going to be affected by this largely. Would a kind of a different type of public works or public art project, which actually does not aim to get big artists, big projects, but like divide up the funds. And actually the culture, that socialist culture, I mean, a lot of it is in Stalinist places, right? The idea that like artists can locally contribute, if we just pay them their living wage, they can contribute by creating public works that are not in spaces that are like dangerous to breathe. They're outside, they're not large scale, they're small scale. So they would be fulfilled by creating work and receiving an income, because otherwise I think artists are going to be hit by this. I think artists need their own welfare system out of this, because this is going to be really devastating for people who are like making so little of their life from the art world, or almost none, but waiting, and now there seems to be no prospect. So that's why I had this like double relationship with what our colleague Obrist said in terms of public art. So I think it's one of the things that can be reconceived or reimagined in terms of how creating public art, meaning art in the public, in open space, can actually help the political economy of artists. And I think if somebody wants to address that, you know, think about it and bring it up, that would be good. Until then, maybe first we should get Klaus, because Klaus had some comments, and then Julieta. Klaus, please unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, there's a few things I wanted to follow up on. One is Clementine's comment where she said we shouldn't speak generically about art and the art world. I find that really important, because we're so easily generalize what we think art is and then say that's happening to art, but situations are so different in terms of practices. Of course, when you're a video artist, maybe it's easier to take your work online than when you're a sculptor or when you're working with space. Lives are different. When you have a 3-year-old kid and you don't have a proper studio, your situation is different. And depending on the place where you are, your situation will be different too. So I think if we want to speak about this not too generically and actually be precise, it's important to try and distinguish these different aspects, which makes it much harder to speak about it, but I think more adequate as well. And I've been trying to kind of think about the purely mechanical way of understanding this. So there's always like one phenomenon. For instance, we cannot travel that easily right now. Okay, and maybe in the near future we won't travel that easily. What does that mean? Well, that art fairs can't take place, and that then what would be a coping strategy, that we look at what is closer to us. So that's what Maria brought up, and and look at what's already there. So each time there seems to be like one thing that's in this mechanics of how the epidemic is being managed more than what it is, because it's mainly about how governments manage the epidemics, and then what that has as an impact. And one aspect is this moving online, and that was important in the questions you sent along as well, that a lot of the things that used to take place in space are now replaced by online equivalents, or at least that's one coping strategy, is to try and find an online equivalent of something we did normally in space, in meeting personally. Another strategy is to like shift your work and produce native content. And the third strategy would be the one that was evoked by several people, to say not produce, but observe or think or rethink production. So these are all ways to try to cope with this situation where think that the normality of before doesn't exist. And what this moving online seems to do is that the imaginary museum becomes like the only museum that we have access to. But when I first thought of that, and when Malraux came up with the concept in 47, he was thinking of the 19th century as the imaginary museum as a complement to, and Mo, you're still on the screen. I don't know if everybody sees me actually, or just hears me, but when Malraux thought about that, the imaginary museum, this reproduction and the access through photos was only a complement to the actual museum experience. I thought, okay, now it has to replace the actual museum experience. And a lot of people are speaking about democratization, but the truth is it only was a complement for the people who had access to the museums, who could travel around, who could see the Bruegel exhibition, who live in Vienna, London, Paris, and so on. And for other people, the imaginary museum, for many people in the world, was the only thing they always ever had. And when we speak of democratization, I think what we should be speaking about is that we have democratization because now that those that got to travel before, or that lived in the capitals, don't travel anymore, and they are in the same situation as most of the world was before. So democratization is not about giving more access to people, but giving less access to those people that had access, that then become like the common lot of the people living in the world, and having access to art only through digital tools and books and so on and so forth. And so also to speak a little bit in terms of maybe Kimberly's question, one thing that also seems to happen is that we won't be able to allow a lot of people into spaces anymore at the same time. This means no more blockbuster exhibitions, because blockbuster exhibitions thrive on the fact that many people go into the space, many people are willing to pay 20, 25 euros. So that's gone.
There are institutions that the whole model is around that, right? So like
exactly
with the conveyor belt, right? People going up and down the stairs like constantly. It's like, what are they going to do when they can get millions of people in for $25 a visit, right?
Exactly. And that's also speaking to Simon when he said, well, now maybe the MAC needs to rethink their strategy, because MAC was really going towards a tendency that then he called the big fun exhibition, where exhibitions bringing a lot of people that have like a big sponsoring from Sephora, making experience rooms and all that shit. And refocusing on maybe the more intellectual, complicated stuff and research, for instance. Spectacular stuff doesn't work very well on a private screen either. So these are two things where I'm like, oh, I'm kind of happy with what's happening, because all this spectacular art, where half of the funding basically of a Nuit Blanche in Paris, or 1/4 of it went into one spectacular work, when you can't go see the work and you need to find a replacement, then this also seems to be affected a little bit. Yeah, so these are some of the things I wanted to speak about.
Okay, so I owe an apology to Azu, because he was supposed to speak right after Clementine, but then there was a bit of like comment. So then can we go to Azu and then to Julieta, and then we're gonna get Boris, a good friend of Julieta, to maybe hopefully engage both each other and maybe me and Adnan. Go ahead, Azu.
Thank you, Mohammed.
From Lagos, right?
Yes, I'm in Lagos. Thank you. I suppose from my perspective, maybe perhaps I should just give a little bit of a background about my collaboration with Dr. Deliss. And I had invited Clementine to Lagos to work with me on a restitution project. And it was really almost right at the cusp of the COVID situation. We ended the project, so it felt like a perfect fissure, you know, like a perfect split at the time. No one could predict how deep and how rapidly the pandemic would evolve. So it's been quite, you know, to use a banal word, weird, going through it and to imagine the timeliness of the idea of a restitution debate, because the debate was sparked off by the work of by the work commissioned by Emmanuel Macron with, I'm blanking on the names now. And so the idea really was to work on this restitution debate and to investigate how we can discuss restitution from a side road, not from the usual iconic totem that everyone is aware of. And so Clementine and I actually worked on this, and we traveled around these municipal museums in Nigeria, visiting them, and, you know, sort of doing a condition report, if you like. And right now, my interest and my guess, because I work with a lot of contemporary artists, is a lot of artists that I've worked with, the contemporary artists on the continent and in diaspora, always explore the issue of diaspora, of the issue of futures and the issue of futurism. Afrofuturism became a very common trope over the last, say, 10 years. And so this condition that we're actually living right now seems like one that is ready-made or tailor-made for the artists that I've been working with over the last few years. So it seems like if they have a ready-made solution for it. And so it's almost like it's a wait-and-see situation for us. The other thought that I had really is, I think the most interesting way to describe our situation is that we all feel like if we're a bit like we're in exile, and all of us who work in the art world as curators or artists, the one constant is that we're constantly on the move. We're always traveling, and so issues of representation, issues of fairness, of equity, of distribution, I think we have an opportunity to kind of slow down, sitting at home, become a little bit more parochial, if you like, look around us for inspiration, if you like, and begin to reinvent and recalibrate the way we engage with the art world. So I feel like, for me, this is more of an opportunity because we've pushed the extremes of, I think we've pushed the extremes of the format, you know, what I call the pre-COVID situation. And we have the chance to reinvent and recreate a more equitable and more fair and more sustainable situation for artists from majority world countries to be able to participate. And I mentioned exile because I thought exile is always something that you almost either volunteer to do or you're forced to do. And I think we're all in this sort of situation of exile where we're forced into this situation, or, you know, we opt into it. And exile only allow those in that situation to come up with solutions. And I think the current situation, forced exile, as we talk about creativity and art and reinvention, it's really one that allows us an opportunity to come up with new solutions. That would be my view.
Awesome. Julieta, do you want to speak? Unmute yourself. Oh, you by mistake, you muted yourself again. It was unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, I just wanted to address a couple of things, like very, very concretely in terms of economics. Yeah, like what happens when, you know, we can like theorize about it, and it's great for people that have jobs and so on, for people that rely on their artwork sales. Like I know that art galleries that had these 2 fairs this year got all their sales canceled. So I expect a number of galleries, if the gallery system was already not in a particularly good shape, I expect it to fold, to be really disastrous. And I would like to be wrong, but I am not too optimistic about it. So that, of course, trickles down in the negative to artists that depend on sales, that don't have steady curatorial jobs, that don't have teaching jobs, that actually do depend on the work that they sell. So it creates, and in a system that has already been highly competitive and Darwinian, that gets put on display at art fairs, which are highly competitive, and where you are constantly being forced to see, how to make sure that you actually can right away make your next rent payment and so on. I have a day job, but if I had to leave from my sales, I would be really in a horrendous position at the moment. And I know there are many, many people that are in that kind of horrendous position. So they don't have the luxury of theorizing about the future of the art world because they actually need to pay rent. And they have been already, there has been this something I call outsourcing of world problems into the creative imagination of artists, where they have to solve everything from housing crisis to refugee crisis to their own crisis. The one thing that I just keep thinking as an artist is what kind of model could we use now that does not rely on these atomized characters ready to slice the floor of each other for a piece of the pie, which is, as artists, that's the reality that we live in. So that's a question.
So universal basic income for artists first.
Wouldn't that be nice?
I'm all for it. I really think like this is a chance actually for artists to actually claim that title and redefine their role or emphasize it like boldly and go to these governments that are willing to listen and say, listen, this is a great chance for actually society to understand we have a role and we need to be supported and we need to be put at work.
And there is also a kind of reality behind. The deal has to change because the reality has changed. I mean, let's remember 70s and 80s. Most galleries used to give salaries. They didn't care how many pieces Carl Andre produced. They paid Carl Andre's monthly rent and monthly salary. So I think deals are going to change. But I think my question is a little bit like, Boris, maybe I should stop. And after you, I would like to add another question.
Yeah, let Boris get on, and Boris in black.
Unmute, yes. Hello, everyone. Many thanks for inviting me, and also a pleasure to see some faces of friends, which I didn't see for some time.
Boris, I just have to say, like, you're amongst a few people here in the room that have been consistently supportive of New Center and have been with us and have supported us in thousands of different ways. So it's so great to see your face and to see you present in this discussion. Thanks for joining.
My pleasure and honor. I hope that I will be not that destructive with my small entree, because this whole situation of lockdown, it found me somehow in an extremely paradoxical situation, because last 2 years intensively working on the project which deals with self-isolationism and self-isolation, which in old texts in Philo Juda was called De Vita Contemplativa. And actually, honestly, I have to say that I'm intensively thinking about to leave this world, art worlds. And I'm interested in parallel economies, especially in networks of black metal. So speaking about, empty spaces and peripheries, I'm not interested in periphery because me as black metal, I'm here and I'm the virus. So if you trace economies of I call it the economy of idioti in Greek, somehow someone who seems not to be interested in public issues, but actually it is. It is like if you trace the most serious self-analysis of Spotify a few years ago, 2/3 of listeners of Spotify are listeners of heavy metal and not pop music. So in that case, the mainstream is completely fabricated mythos, you know, it's metal, it's not pop music. What is pop actually? And but what is paradox? I'm writing about depression, burnout, and need of self-isolation, solitude, exile. And that's a negative utopia of me. But what we live now is actually positive dystopia of us. And these two things are extremely different, obviously. And I'm super disturbed because and even pissed because I was in last phase of editing my text, and then this thing arrived, and I am confronted, you know, in the interior of the text, which is long, because I mean I can't ignore it, you know. But I'm negative in this, how can I say, in the memory or productive aspect of times which we live. I believe in unfortunate, extremely strong elasticity of imperialism and full storages of seasonal products like fashion, for example, you know. There will be three seasons of fashion. They are lying in storages. So what we expect, what we can expect, of course, at the first is a tsunami of sales, you know. And I mean, unfortunately, I believe that this tsunami will erase most of those questions which we intimately pose to ourselves these days. And I mean, it is important to pose these questions, and it is important to go through the vita contemplativa. And I mean, I even physically live in a forest last 6 weeks. So yeah, that's my point. Like, not to be very optimistic, maybe to be like really pessimist, you know, like that's, and to speak about parallel economies and not to speak about periphery, you know, because, you know, the periphery and center, these things, they changed a lot, you know. And also, like, what is alternative, you know? In the meantime, alternative received very negative connotation. So I don't know.
I just want to add this like dark point. I was reading how people who already have got COVID and are over it and have antibodies will be very sought after at expensive shops, at like maybe museums where people, like a lot of people go, and how this will cause a lot of people to actually try to get infected, because once they get infected and get over it, then they can like kind of like join the economy again, which is such a dark concept.
Yeah.
To me. You know what I mean, like to actually say, okay, the way out is in, first in. We got to get in before we can get out, right? And actually, doctors are planning for this. They're planning like major like stuff saying like, don't take this risk, don't do this, because a lot of people are already thinking about like self-infecting themselves in order to have an economy afterwards, basically. It's a really dark times.
Yes, but what I'm somehow, you know, going through is a contemplation about, how can I say, like different economy, you know, on the basis of existing models which function, like black metal, for example, which is not small, which is not minor. It's kind of widespread, huge phenomena.
Okay, Adnan, you can take it.
There is actually just an open letter sent to eFlux right now about Angela Merkel, and they are appreciating the leadership Angela Merkel has been performing for her country, and they're asking the same for European and thinking about how to protect Europeans. This concerns me a lot because, I mean, of course, there's a kind of relationship with an organization of space, and there's also gender layer, like Finland or New Zealand or Germany came up with strong models of dealing with the situation. There is Clementine, there is Maria, there is Hito, there is Cagla, there is Asli and Manal, who are working in art institutions, art schools, or different kind of, they have to be leaders in their life. These people are natural born leaders. If I would like to hear about how we could completely take this opportunity to reorganize ourselves, or how can we change the organizational structure in an institution, because my concern is most probably in an art institution, there is no medical care team, or you never thought of sending your curatorial assistant to a first aid course. But we know that we all deal with these missions from our health and safety documents. We are signing that they are okay. And now, instead of imagining the public space as a nest for virus and bacteria, and the first thing to be shut down in emergency, why we don't think about, imagine another form like a boat? Why we don't think about the institutions that support structures, especially in these times when we really need them? Where are they? Clementine, I would really like to hear your thoughts on this.
I agree with you, and actually I would like to throw the ball back to Azu, because it would be interesting to know how he's dealing with the foundation which he set up in Lagos 13 years ago, how he's dealing with the 10 staff that he has, and what it means to, in Lagos, to, it's not so simple. Maybe I thank you, you know, I think we have a task for sure. And I have been trying in the last few years to motivate an interest on the part of students on the question of infrastructure. And I think the most interesting moment was when students in Leipzig and Paris decided that they didn't have similar politics, or at least they couldn't name the similarity between their political stance. And they didn't have the same approach to art practice. So they decided to buy a 1968 Grapho press, a kind of a bootleg of a Heidelberg machine, one of the earliest machines, the ones that, you know, have hands and move paper, very small pieces of paper, and to move it across Europe, as, in other words, to create an infrastructure that would then be the basis of the collective. And the infrastructure, the machine, would tell the young artists how to operate, rather than to kind of preconceive it and then bring in what you need. And that was pretty exciting, and actually very whatever. It was it sort of feels right now. And the project that we ended up doing was called Europe or Die. And yeah, but I'd love to hear what Azu has to say on this, because this question of organization, infrastructure, particularly for foundations that already have existed, that have created a name for themselves, that are smaller, that are not peripheral, is the big issue now. If that's okay, I would pass the word on.
Thank you. As I mentioned exile previously, I actually think that when you interrogate the situation and you spend time in exile, it forces you to sort of reimagine a new identity for yourself. So I believe that institutions, every single institution that is smart, that is going to evolve from the condition that we find ourselves in right now, needs to imagine a new identity for itself. I don't think anyone should imagine going back or reverting to the old, to the previous way we did it. We conducted our affairs, we engaged with the public. So personally in Lagos, what we're focused on actually is a new kind of institution. I don't think we failed over the last 14 years that we've been in operation. I just think this opportunity that we have with this, you know, COVID and post-COVID situation allows us to think about education as a fundamental, as the most, the one aspect of our endeavor, if you like, that has not really changed over the last century. And I think that if we're going to, you know how when you read about war, the First World War, the Second World War, you always read this caption, "But we lost the very best of our generation." So lots of great people passed on. I feel like if we're in a situation where that liminal space where people are fading out and people are coming in, we can do something meaningful with education. So, and we can transform our identity. We don't need to conform to the way we've considered our spaces, our institutions before now. So personally, we are really putting a lot of energy into curatorial practices that involve a decolonial identity for our people, that embraces a more diaspora in a very real sense. We think that the opportunity to work with digital technology allows us the opportunity to really engage with the wider public rather than worrying about, well, they can't make it out here because it's so far. Rather, we think we can now do this because everyone has gotten used to a new way of working. And I don't think that there's any chance that, to speak to Kimberly's previous question, I don't think there's any real chance that there will be sustainable engagement the way we've done things in the past. I think there will be what economists call a dead cat bounce, where everyone immediately, the restrictions are lifted, we quickly dive into the previous norm, but there will be repercussions, and that repercussion leads to us, will lead to us finding balance in the new norm. So those are sort of my ideas around this situation, because I spent a lot of time actually musing and contemplating, not doing too much in terms of creative enterprise, but really musing and contemplating around this current situation.
Awesome, thank you. Adnan, do you have any more questions, or maybe unmute yourself? You're still, yes.
Sorry, I would like to welcome Joanna. I have seen Ovul online just a while ago, and Jason and a couple of others. Hi guys, how are you doing? It is evolving, and actually when I see you, I would like to reframe the question, because exactly like we were talking about the letter to Angela Merkel, just sent on Influx right now, then we jumped into the new world leaders, new models like Finland, New Zealand, or again Germany. Maybe it is time to learn from another form of organizational structure, because you also know the difference when you go to so I would like to ask Joanna, Ovul, Cagla about their ideas. How can we rethink organizational structures, public domain, or new spaces? I mean,
you're trying to get them to talk about the project they did in Prenzlauer Berg, right? So
a little bit, warming up.
Yes.
Shall I start? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. Well, so for us, maybe it will be more concrete to base on this example of a project we just did, the Balkone in Prenzlauer Berg. It actually originated from a conversation we had, Ovul and me, in the park around maybe 3 weeks ago, where many of us, we posed ourselves the questions that we all share in those times, obviously, about what is public, what is private, what is the threshold of public and private. And of course, we talked about balconies and their political history, and somehow balconies as this little elements of the private being outside. And obviously balconies since then became very famous, but somehow this led also to the self-understanding of our position as culture producers, culture makers in Berlin, and different artist scenes being present in Berlin, and specifically in Prenzlauer Berg, where we both live, and some of them, the artist scene being here from the 80s, part of a squatting scene, then people who arrived from West Germany in the 90s, but also a lot of internationals like ourselves, living next to each other, and for once being somehow together in 5 square kilometers. And from that conversation, like an attempt of an invitation, a proposal of an invitation came out. Like, what if we reach out now to our colleagues that we often meet somewhere else than Berlin, and ask them if they would feel like, and of course, we didn't insist on anyone, because we completely understand it was maybe not, it is a special time, and maybe for some people it's a time of withdrawal, but we kind of reached out to many people with this invitation and asking whether they would feel like creating a collectivity in isolation, not through the digital space. I mean, we reached out to them, of course, through digital space, but the aim was to exhibit something in the windows and balconies on the Easter weekend, and somehow show their liveness, show their signs of life, their presence. Ovul, would you like to continue from here?
Yes, so we'll unmute, and you're going to join this other, yes.
Are you with us? I think she's Ovul.
I'm unmuted by the host. Okay, cool. I didn't realize. Cool. So yes, yeah, I want to continue from there. Exactly the call for the balcony. It really kind of developed in a very almost natural way to respond to an urgency. But we were very aware that when we sat down and let's say brought the call together, our concerns and our historical framework for introducing such a format in our neighborhood, we were very much aware that actually it would be basically the answer to the call would make the call real rather than our text. And exactly like it really grew very organically, and the artists, many of the people that we responded, I think like very like high majority of the people that we got in touch with very quickly understood what we were trying to do in our text, and like to be part of this actually collective voice in a very irregular way, breaking the usual format of exhibition making, of project making, also breaking the format of like public sphere artwork as such, and appear in our project in a space that is equally visible and invisible, where they can join voices. And actually, like we really reached a really honest plurivocality, I would say, talking about our neighborhood, the psychogeography of this particular neighborhood and its history, and every unique voice had their position, and they made up the whole. So it wasn't one thing separate from the other, which I think is something that maybe we are also lacking in other like similar driven, let's say, regular contemporary art projects as such, where people are mainly following, let's say, what someone is doing and coming for that particular point, rather than being lost in space and like searching with their own intuition and with their own sense of space and look for the conversation.
Can I be the devil's advocate?
Please.
Yes, I mean, I owe a lot to Ovul because we have been sharing a long friendship, and in this time, in the early years, you might think several debates were based on personal stuff, but also today I realize we really have a very different way of thinking. This is why I would like to immediately respond, and I think it's a great opportunity. Did you somehow think of class and balcony together in the same,
for sure,
in the same ground?
Sure.
Because my idea was a bit like, I really wanted everything to stop. Maybe it was my personally not good time. I really wanted the whole world to stop. So my consideration was more, why do we have to make another event? Why we need to wake up the art social monster? Are we so addicted to it when everything is laying down? I'm very honest with you. It has nothing to do with your project. I'm just talking about the feeling.
No, I read some of your comments also,
yeah.
to, for example, to whose post was it? Ali Cherry was writing something, and I saw you also.
Wait a minute, I thought Adnan is not on social media anymore. Can you send me the account? I really do.
No, I saw his response, like in real. I was like, okay, he's back.
I responded to him, I have to admit. No, I mean, it is really about the attention economy, but also, why do we need to bring the old ways of doing things? Maybe we should just stop and take this time. But I'm really curious because I sneaked in Instagram and saw a fantastic gesture by Ulf Aminde. So I'm generously curious about it, seriously. So I really want to think about this balcony and class, because is this enough to reclaim the whole street? Is this still relevant? I mean, we used to do these public projects, but is it relevant now? So how did you go through these sort of questions? Because with class, you were thinking about proximity a lot, and it is changing a lot because art means a lot of sociality. But how you see this project relevant for us to think about proximity with class? Because I think class wars in the art system, in the art, we are going to be more and more used to it. The way we talk about class 2 years ago in Venice was different. 10 years ago, it was definitely different. I could get into any party as a young curator as no one. But 2 years ago, you need to go through these iPads into the oligarchy gardens. But now, I think, like, imagine this AIDS, art, and the culture wars. Are we ready for the culture wars? Am I the only one who's feeling like war? Or just like...
I mean, first of all, I mean, let me take from your very like urgent and very valuable questions. The war has been there for quite some time now. It hasn't started with Corona. It has been coming. We knew it was coming. It was there, and I only think like I only take the virus in this way, or like its effects on our bodies as also a collective body, as a sort of a wake-up call. So this was also, for example, very clear in the online meeting that another webinar that I was part of with Angela Davis and Naomi Klein, and in the way that they were seeing it's kind of incomplete also conversation or like as a kind of a class construction, and how the period that we are going through right now can undo certain power hierarchies that are existing, and to really like let people know who is doing the real work here. So who is basically on the street going to work every day to be able to make bourgeoisie stay at home in their safe spaces, so that this family unit can be protected. So and of course, I think the value of this period is to really make these invisible people more visible as the really like the people who are normally treated as garbage by the society, by the capitalist like mentality, as like the kind of actually hardcore supporters, columns of the society. So, I mean, this is a kind of where we start from. And then of course, we worked in a very particular neighborhood. We worked in a neighborhood with a really strong working class history. I mean, where I live, just across, is like the last social community housing that was built by DDR, but before there was a factory. And actually, that's why all of the old buildings in Prenzlauer Berg look so worn down, because of the pollution and because nobody actually wanted to live there, live in the neighborhood, or like kind of, it was only like kind of the workers like who were living here. And suddenly, of course, now you see this new phase of the neighborhood. There is a kind of a huge gap, in between, though the remains of the history, like the moments are still there for anyone to bring up the puzzle together. So it's not invisible completely, like, let's say, in other parts of Berlin in this way. So it was, of course, a class as a complex question in Prenzlauer Berg, with the new population of Berlin, with its transformation. Of course, it's the hidden question that is sitting in the middle of everything. And I think also many of the participants, many of like the people of a collective, this collective voice, really kind of thought about their position in this neighborhood and what it means that they communicate with each other, and what it means that they get in touch with each other, and where is this drive coming from. So the street, maybe the last word, still keeps this symbolical position, because as we all know, while we are like all, struggling with the big reality and like cornered or quarantined in our homes, some governments are taking very dangerous decisions that can really shape the direction of the future post-COVID-19 process. So.
Joanna, do you have any words to add?
Yeah, sure. I mean, very briefly, I think what was also driving us in this project was, there is the ongoing discussion about system relevant jobs. And of course, it reverses certain hierarchies, and it's really good to make certain jobs visible. And obviously, art is not on the list of system relevant jobs, but yet you ask yourself about big words you very often read in curatorial statements or catalogs about art ability to outreach, art ability to produce ontological meaning, etc. And somehow, I absolutely recognize, Adnan, that you felt like staying at home and doing nothing. I absolutely, respect it, and we would never push you to be part of our project. What we did is that we first, between two of us, we shared a need to stop business as usual, but yet see how art can be maybe system relevant. Can it produce actually meaning in some sense at that moment, and can it produce us as neighbors? Because also we started to map and look around and meet people who are in the first place and have become neighbors of ours. And in that moment, neighbors actually are maybe, you're always a neighbor, and maybe you should always think about yourself as a neighbor. But in that moment, neighbor is gaining new meaning, something I remember from my childhood in the 80s in Poland, kind of as a helping hand of a neighbor. And so we first reached out to these people as neighbors and then also as artists. And from this project came up, suspending a little bit the business as usual, coming out of our needs, and only those, of course, who wanted and felt like us joined the project. And some of them, like Lina, Madeleine, and Rabbi Mrue, actually decided to also invite all their real neighbors from the building. So in their case, the whole building displayed itself. So there were very many ways of articulation of your position and your isolation, and also perhaps this very need and greed in that moment to go and experience this walk out of your screen. Go out and just walk around and look at things and be there physically as a body in the space. So this is how we kind of teased up the project.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think there is a little bit continuity in discussion. Egemen, are you there? Do we have Egemen?
Until Egemen comes, I just want to say that as someone who introduced to living in Berlin in Prenzlauer Berg, I basically due to Julieta's generosity, I stayed in Prenzlauer Berg in 2016 for a month. Was my first time kind of like living in Berlin.
So you're also Rabestrasse fellow, yeah.
Like downstairs from Joanna, right? And I kind of like I could sense that this change that you were talking about in neighborhood, but I never. But when I moved to Mita, Mita is like great. So I never felt so jealous of not being in Prenzlauer Berg, because I would have loved to participate in what you did. And basically, if I lived there, I would have tried to like link what you did with these series of discussions online, because I think there's kind of like they come from the same kind of need to not even necessarily like produce the best art or like put the best artists on the map like we were talking about now, but the fact that you just pulse this to the world that like artists are there, art is alive, and art still does something. Well, maybe it's not to the like glitzy quality you see in Hamburger Bahnhof or like, I don't know, MoMA or I don't know somewhere, but art is thriving still. And you know what I mean? It's very important. Like, I think it's more significance is more curatorial than artistic. And I think at that level, I think it was needed. And like, when we look back, maybe 10, 20 years, it will be interesting to look at it as like this like response, this very like local vernacular response to this crisis, because I didn't hear any other city like Paris, New York, all these like metropolitan cities to have produced such a kind of like a time capsule.
Actually, I can say that in Paris right now, a sister project is in discussion. But of course, like and we are part of the conversation because of our experience and like giving feedback, of what we experienced and what happened and like what were the issues and how to basically respond to one's own city and one's own like artist community and its needs. Of course, Paris is a much more hardcore, precarious city in this way in terms of its also various working class. So of course, the project is like, it is like kind of shaping around these ideas. But indeed, so this response is also kind of developing at the moment. But I also like kind of wanted to say for us, like the horizontal way of organization. If if we connect also like these questions of the new leadership models and like kind of models of care and models of horizontality. And I think in the balcony, what we tried to do as like the curators was to really mix, in our group and like try to create this as horizontally as possible and breaking into the usual hierarchies of public art spectacle as such. And of course, it is very interesting, like to see from like, or to hear from people like their surprises. And as you said, that how art just can be and use us as its mediators, as a power of expression, as like a claim of space, like saying, we are here, we are alive, we are not leaving the ground to you. And we want to take our position. So you need to remember that we are here. We won't give up the places that we gained. So it is then it kind of with the horizontality, I think, because of the challenging the format and the model, then it became more real, more tactile, like as a physical experience also, which I think with Joanna really empowered us as curators to see it's happening in this way. A lot of ideas that we have been reading and writing about that was actually like kind of there happening, and it was possible.
Okay, maybe we should let Eva also speak as one of the artists who participated. Okay.
But can I ask a question? I was exactly thinking to welcome Eva. She's part of this process, but I have a question directly to Eva and maybe to the cat at the same time. And then I thought we can move to Asli and Mona again and again, because next to this line, Joanna, Ovul, and Eva will keep with us. There's another track I see. It is like negative participation, maybe withdrawal, or maybe thinking through other strategies. Eva, for me, to be honest now, as if we are talking one-to-one, I completely see two different things. On one pole, I see Mo and New Center thing as part of his practice evolving. And to be very honest with you, balcony for me is the opposite. Am I wrong, or am I getting it wrong?
Complementary.
They are very different things.
Let's hear what Eva has to say. You have to unmute yourself, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Oh, baby boy.
Yeah, for those who do not know, he had a really bad accident, and I just picked him up today from the hospital, and he had an operation, and yeah, so it's the first day home for him. And he has to wear like a funny bodysuit.
Followed the lockdown rules and not gone out, but you know.
What?
Maybe the cat should have like respected the lockdown rules and not gone out.
Yeah. But I must say I don't quite understand the question, because the Center for Research and balconies are, of course, two very different things. Why should they be the same? Can you clarify what you mean with that, Anna?
I feel almost they are a little bit like nemesis of each other. They are, so if it is from A to B, the other one is B to A. Or am I the only one who is getting it like this?
But I mean, the Center for Research like was something that existed. I mean, that you meet, and it's the first time I'm participating.
Sorry, to be very clear, sheltering places, not new center. Sheltering places.
This program, we
COVID-19.
began this program just in a kind of similar manner. You guys thought of the urgency of the project was very similar. Like, you know what I mean? Like bringing some kind of like togetherness to think through this and think of ways in which we can still continue to produce what we do under these conditions, really. Like with Reza and my colleague Valentin, when we thought about this, because actually Reza just joined us, not as a host tonight because Reza's been substituted with Adnan. So this is kind of like the analogy comes from that. But, you know, in no sense, nobody says something is like better or something. It's just like ours was about insisting on relevance of the cyberspace, and yours was insisting on creating some kind of a public still in the physical public world out there in the physical world, right?
Exactly, because I think this is what many people yearn for, to like get out of this endless, you know, being tormented by online exhibitions and only able to talk to other people via Zoom. Not that this is a bad thing, of course, but I think there was a strong desire to create something physical and to meet people in real time, even with a safe distance. And I mean, people go out for strolls anyway here in this privileged neighborhood, of course. I mean, that you also have to, you cannot forget that Prenzlauer Berg is a very privileged neighborhood, and people are privileged anyway who have balconies. And but what should I say? I mean, it was, for me, it was a big relief to have this project out of isolation, also out of worrying about this little guy and like this Easter thing where you used to be with your family, to spend this all by oneself could also be a bit depressing. And I collaborated with my neighbor, and that also I did this to also show that we have a strong community in our house. And it was the first time that we collaborated on an art project, and it went super good. We were both so happy with what we did, and that also created another kind of community and sense of togetherness. May sound really like naive, but that's what it was for me.
I think it would be really good to hear Egemen. Egemen is an artist based in Berlin. He's not the most social friend of mine, and I would like to push him because I know he's someone thinks a lot about negative participation, withdrawal, or also thinking through proposals, but sometimes absence means a lot. So maybe theoretically or artistically, Egemen, would you like to elaborate on this?
Thank you, Adnan. I think you pretty much summarized the kind of the key points I wanted to make. I think when I hear Mo say the art is still thriving, I think it is really not as strong as before because of all the problems, and I think that's okay. What really shocked me actually about the whole online takeover of museums and institutions was that how little fight there was to conserve the exhibition space. I think we lost the exhibition space, not only its physicality, but also as a framework. And I think that was I think in the future will be a quite problematic situation for us. But this is also a time where we think about, or feel strongly about our positions before this event happened. And until when such a crisis happens, the urgency is for us to push the importance and the immediacy of these positions forward. But I'm very suspicious of how relevant these positions will be when we go back to the new old life.
That's what Boris also said just before you joined, but it's interesting to hear this again. Yes, go ahead.
Because I think we have to be very suspicious, and we have to, and the hardest task is to really identify what is the authentic fight here. What is it? I mean, because we can keep talking about all these themes, like these particularities, all these positions that we need, the notion of visibility, the notion of plurality, and so on and so forth. But how is that different from before this event? Because in a way, what we're seeing now, at least on a political scheme or on a political situation, is that we are slowly moving towards an intensification of the political trends we had before. and plus an erasure of a middle class. And this kind of situation places us in a point where we have to rethink, I think, under what umbrella can we unite all of these different topics and different positions? Because I think one of the problems we have is that we still cannot identify transnational structures apart from a global, or like apart from the global economy. And that, I think, if anything, today was extremely clear, or during this event, was extremely clear that they are not the same thing. And actually, we do need transnational institutions. And just a little bit, I think, to kind of talk a little bit about a bigger picture, I wanted to, I think at the moment we are having a crisis of theory, in the sense that not the theoretical thinking is crisis, but the crisis we have, although we have practical implications, is actually that we cannot come up with a theory in science, in medicine, in political economy, that or any kind of thing that actually works. We're trying new things that we cannot really come up with something that works. How does this translate to art? Like, how does art behave in times of theoretical crises? I think not so good, because we've seen in the past when there is not a viable alternative, political or theoretical or philosophical, and combined with conservative direction, art tends necessarily, art runs away from contradictions. And I think like we can still keep our critical positions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are pro contradiction. We are thinking about the contradiction. So I think in a sense, this is to do with when I bring it back to withdrawal, I think there is a very important value in thinking about, especially when we think about the institutions, how will they face the contradictions that will arise from their identities. On the one side, their national, their extreme dependence on national states, and on the other side, what are the things that they can withdraw from, actually? Not isolation, but because I still think if the institution said, we are shutting down, we're not going to operate on any level, because we need to preserve this space until this situation is resolved. And that lack of art at that moment would actually give us the possibility to kind of think what is how do we want to come back? What is our response to this? And what is the kind of, it's provided a blank state that we can go back to.
Because there is going to be a monopoly of few galleries taking over the online market, and definitely later this shrink in the economy, how are we going to keep this plurality? Museums, are they canceling big name shows, or just canceling the education or learning activities or research projects? In this way, I would like to talk Mona and Asli again, because I know in their practice they can withdraw. They don't negotiate, or they don't compromise. They withdraw. I would like to.
Adnan, before we go to them though, the conversation that Egemen started. I think we have two people above Egemen, Reza and Jason, that can kind of like deal with this sort of like poverty of theory at the moment.
Please pray.
Or like, you know how you know what I mean? I actually invited Jason to come to the session. He was like, oh, actually, he kind of changed his mind. He said, you have so many brilliant other people. This is not mine. I'm like, no, you have to come, because in the session that I brought up the fact that we're going to do this event, he had some interesting to say about like how art more like as an abstract entity can react or be useful or not in this time. And I think Reza can have kind of like interesting comments or like commonality with Jason, but also very different. So it's good to hear them talk about this. And then of course we can go back to the artists who are actually lucky enough to be working on their like art project right now called you called it the traveling space, right? Or the moving space, right? Okay, go ahead, Jason. Maybe we start with you.
Thank you again for having me. This is a fascinating conversation. Some notes that I brought, you know, in thinking about what everyone's discussing about public spaces. You know, I've always been suspicious of collectives, to be quite honest with you, and I'm following Kierkegaard's motto that the crowd is untruth. But I don't have a problem with dangerous individuals who spontaneously gather others into a kind of public spectacle through their actions. And so I just had some examples today. You know, whether first things first, whether this pandemic represents an actual apocalyptic threshold or not, in the same way that it's an important exercise in our imagination for us to think about utopia, I think it's equally important for us to deal imaginatively with the concept of doom. So last week in our talk, Mahamid raised a wonderful point about psychosomatic power, which many of you know probably in some instances can have terrible debilitating effects, but in other instances that can generate highly visionary intensities. But either way, we see psychosomatic power as something that you typically notice that emerges only in moments of extreme danger. And I'm going to bring this to everything we've been talking about. You'll see through a little bit of storytelling. For instance, there's this term known as hysterical strength, where mothers who see their children trapped beneath cars are suddenly able to summon an adrenaline rush and lift this massive vehicle to save them. Similarly, my grandfather, who was the most cynical and anti-metaphysical person you could ever encounter, he told me once with wide, unbelieving eyes that he had traveled to an ancient Iranian city and seen this obscure mystical order that would put blades through their flesh or consume fire and feel no pain. And of course, many of us know about the figures of stigmata, who are oftentimes women who throughout history can spontaneously manifest the wounds of Christ on their hands and feet. So all that being said, you know, why did I decide to want to talk about this in relation to what we're saying? What do these examples of psychosomatic power or hysterical strength have in common? It's that their practitioners are all facing doomed worlds. In the case of the mother, the child has fallen into suffocation and potential death. In the case of the mystic, they're whirling themselves into states of self-annihilation. And in the case of stigmata, you're essentially emulating a crucified God. So all of these subjects are confronting an infinite collapse of the structures of their reality or their illusion, however you want to call it. So the question I wanted to raise tonight, listening to the discussion, is how we might conceive of an aesthetics of doomed existence or an aesthetics of the lost cause, if art is becoming the lost cause or if world is becoming the lost cause, but only in order to crystallize this type of power in our creative consciousness. So anticipating this evening's conversation, knowing that I'd be, you know, among some wonderful experts, I started searching through a vast array of amazing contemporary visual artists and particularly installation artists, since, you know, they attempt to build atmospheres, and I think the pandemic is primarily a problem of atmosphere above all else. But then I deviated and decided instead to tell two quick stories, if you'll permit me, just fast, of two women in early Islamic mythology who might be considered some proto-versions of doomsday performance artists. The first woman is actually the biblical figure called Hagar, to whom Muslims actually claim their maternal origin, since she was the banished slave and mistress of Abraham. She went eastward with her orphan son Ismail into the desert. Now, according to the story, she wanders the sands for years. She's always at the knife's edge between survival and starvation. She endures the scorched earth of the desert's days and the chilling temperatures of the dunes at night, not to mention sandstorms and scorpions and thirst and 1,000 other hardships. And we can see how her affliction and radical solitude already makes her a perfect specimen for being the lost cause that I was talking about. But then a twist happens. They say that in the midst of her accursedness, with this dehydrated child crying in her arms, Hagar buries her head in her hands, and when she raises her face, her eyes are shot with pale lunatic whiteness. At that point, she goes completely mad and begins ranting and raving at the skies in desperation. And she starts spitting nonsensical words in every direction. And supposedly, and this is the awesome part of it, supposedly God is at once so disturbed and enchanted by this image that he ultimately saves Hagar and her child and offers them an oasis. To this day, the other name of Hagar is the Reciter, which is obviously a miraculous artistic title, and one that honors a kind of rare performativity that's brought about by her being deserted to absolute futility. So that's the first example. The second lost cause example I thought to mention is almost a diametrically opposite figure, another legendary figure who this time was a mortal enemy of the Islamic forces. Her name was Hind bin Utbah. And Hind was a 7th century aristocratic woman whose father, son, uncle, and brother were all killed in tribal war by the rising Muslim empire of her time.
Oh, Jason, also it's important to say that he almost costed Salman Rushdie his life because she is the figure. Because, you know, people who know why Salman Rushdie was condemned to death and what's wrong with that book can remember the central role of Hind.
That's right.
In that story that put Salman Rushdie in hot waters. But go ahead.
Exactly. And what's fascinating about her is that she thereafter swears revenge and famously opposed the Muslim armies through acts of graphic degradation. So she became infamous. Hind becomes infamous for taking legions of women into the high hills surrounding the battlefields, and they mock and dance and throw stones at the incoming soldiers. But even more so, fabulous tales are told of her singular ability to shriek at the top of her lungs and rocket these ululations at the fighters below. And then after the battle, she would lead women to mutilate the fallen bodies of Muslim warriors. And she would carve their ears and noses into necklaces. She'd even fondle their livers and supposedly bite their right parts in full view of the Prophet. And all the while still screeching as loudly as possible. Now, there are two very intricate details to notice here. First is that she uses almost every aspect of the sensory universe. She's a master of sensation. So she manipulates shrill sounds. She has a touch, you know, sort of manipulates touch in the form of violation and dissection of the chests of the warriors. And then the unforgettable visual sights. You know, to this day, Hind is always pictured with blood streaming down her face in ecstatic vengeance. And the second detail of this episode is that she doesn't negate the enemy, but absorbs the enemy's power by circulating their organs through her own body, which not only, not to get too philosophical, but not only it supposedly denies their spirit unity in the afterlife, but it also maniacally channels their vitalism into herself. And her title, by the way, in Islamic sources is either the soul stealer or the liver eater, which I think anyone would be blessed to have either one of those titles in life. So from the reciter to the soul stealer, we have two figures who perform a fatal gesture against the backdrop of a lost cause episode. And it's simultaneously both a deeply existential and an aesthetic occasion that they conjure. And I'm interested when the existential and the aesthetic obviously bind into one another, which leads me to my final point, namely that in all of these strange samples of extraordinary will that you see in these women and the creative exceptionalism there, there's one single all-important affect that hangs in the balance: rage. And that's what I want to pose to the panel sort of tonight on an aesthetic level. I spent years studying and theorizing the poetics of rage, and I would choose certain apocalyptic poets, men and women, mostly from the Middle East, who would lash out wildly on the last night of the world, and they'd carve the most damaging verses fathomable. And so I'd like to extend that question into our current time of pandemic and wonder what the role of rage might now be in our autistic, thank you, Anna.
Yeah,
might
well,
be in our
great book, especially a great introduction to Persian modern writers and poets, both male and female, from a completely different point of view that they've been presented by sort of like Western academia who showed interest in 70s and 80s in Iranian writers. It's one of my favorite books I've read in the last little while, especially since the twist you put on these Middle Eastern writers is completely fresh and new.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm honored that you say that. And what I'm fundamentally interested in that book and here tonight is, you know, to supplant our outrage for rage. What I'm noticing, they're very different things, conceptually and experientially. Outrage is what I'm seeing everywhere, mostly in our political and social discourses and even our aesthetic discourses. And the problem of outrage is that it's always reactively dialectical. It's almost always a negative symptom of resentment. And it's predicated on an idealistic humanist belief that we're owed something better, you know, that we've somehow been cheated of our rights and that we deserve some hypothetical other life. Rage doesn't have, the rage that you see in Hagar's story or Hind's story doesn't have this intrinsic sense of entitlement, nor does it scapegoat a particular enemy. It's a 0 degree of what could almost call imminent fury. and it always moves towards the sources of violence. You know, like children in fairy tales who wander into the dark forest. You know, the lesson of those fairy tales is that they pursue the threatening shapes, and they often even consume or devour them. And then they refine those cataclysmic forces into a new imagination that's usually both unprecedented and enigmatic. So my last point was just to say, you know, that's perhaps how the lost cause makes a last stand. And it's precisely how a philosophy of doom and an aesthetics of doom might be our greatest challenge and possibility moving forward. So I wanted to just put that out there.
Reza, what do you think? I just read the message you sent, like that, like, yeah, like if art is a lost cause, so much beautiful lost cause. Unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mo. Very, very quick, as I have to run for a couple of things. With regard to the question of theoretical crisis, you see, I think that just a misnomer, precisely because what is theory without crisis? Either epistemological or practical. In fact, to take out the word crisis of theory, you're just having dogma. So it is, what we are confronting here is that just like any sort of what Thomas Kuhn talks about, the scientific crises, and crises are not really what you might call to be the nemesis of theory. They are, in fact, they're doppelgangers, without which the theory doesn't, in fact, exist. I think that we are, yes, sure, in that sense, we are, in fact, living in a time that many of our, for example, theories of biology, virology, epidemiology, economy, politics are being pushed to the limits of their crises, which are not, as I mentioned, opposed to the theory itself. It just shows that a better theory should be developed out of them. And if it can't, then it should be revised. It's just basically 101 sociology of sciences. So I don't think that we are particularly living in a time of theoretical crisis. We are just living in a context where some of the existing scientific and theoretical crises are now being highlighted under the constraints of practice, urgency, so on and so forth. Otherwise, there is nothing really special about it in terms of this. Then coming back to, I heard, my apologies, I just basically joined at the middle of conversation, so my apologies if I'm misrepresenting anyone's message here. First of all, I would say that whether by art we mean art in general, or art as contemporary institutionalized, whether privately or publicly, art world, I would say that art has a duty to go above being the time capsule for human narcissism. A time capsule for human narcissism is essentially what we are dealing with here at this point. Kind of art that artists are making during COVID-19. Like, what does it matter? You know, as Jason said it, if we are in the time of doom, then we actually should not think about giving up on art, but should give up on the very idea of human narcissism that most often art encapsulates. So that's one. Then I completely understand that, you know, majority of you are artists, I'm a philosopher. My only institutional affiliation is with New Center, and I don't have any academic job. I'm a freelancer, but I can completely understand that the majority of your focus at this point is on the institutional basically ambience or atmosphere of art. But why should this be? Why should we preserve this institutionalized ambience? Aren't artists who are doing good art outside of institution, just like philosophers who do good philosophy outside of academia? Why putting all this stress and economic gossiping, why this and that, about institutionalized dimension of art? So that's number two. Number three, you know, this idea that I have seen some artists, not from this talk, from previous talks, like they're talking that, you know, there is a certain kinds of, you know, art is important precisely in this time, particularly because of certain kind of physical contact, de-stressing, you know, basically potentialities, so on and so forth. But if art is all about de-stressing, then why not go gardening? You know, that's even more de-stressing for you. Has a better tactile thing. You have a better curatorial system. Ask any gardener. You think that gardeners are not curators? And in fact, it pays down the road when you actually end up with no cucumber or tomato. Do you want an artwork or cucumber and tomato when the time comes?
Reza, the thing about it is that, you know, on some level, of course, you can compare philosophers within institution and outside, and artists within institution and outside. But you gotta understand, if you're good, if you know, you wrote Cyclopedia from Shiraz, right? You wrote Cyclopedia in Shiraz. Nobody knew who you were, and when the book came out, the kind of like vocabulary you invented, the kind of like the genre you invented, you know what I mean? You know, it had a lot to do with the fact that the work that you do at the end of the day is equal to the work of a writer. It all like, it takes like certain amount of money to print it. That's not the case with art. You know, artworks are, you know, the output, at the output level, you cannot even compare because they're incredible.
But that's just gallery artwork.
Let me just, they're incredible artists that make work, but because they do not have the institutional support, because they do not have powerful curators supporting them, that work can't even become a book and published. So somebody in the West goes like, oh my God, I just discovered this incredible writer in Shiraz, Iran. This person needs to have visibility. Right?
Yes, I completely understand with regard to the distribution end of it. But even then, there are in fact outside artists who are getting attention, sometimes from institutions, sometimes from private investors, just completely outside of, you know, the regular gallery or any sort of institution, museum, so on and so forth. It happens. I mean, yes, I completely understand that the constraints of, you know, contemporary art world are far higher than, for example, creating a piece of music or so on and so forth. But then there is actually, that's a good thing that I bring into what I wanted to talk about. The kind of what Jason was talking about, doom art, like living in the atmosphere of doom. If we are talking about cost, distribution, and stuff, which are absolutely, I completely understand as an engineer that these are real constraints. If we are going to talk about them, I can actually say that what about the video game pathologic? Perhaps the greatest video game ever made on the topic of plague. Nothing really in the history of video game, nothing actually is compared to it.
Which game is that?
Pathologic. It's a Russian game. The head designer is a friend that I am sort of working on for a new script.
You're doing promotion. Okay, I'm kidding.
Yes. His name is Nikolai Dybowski, D-Y-B-O-W-S-K-I. So we're just basically an independent video game. And you know that Russian video games don't sell really, they're not like blockbuster things, but they were even more independent than other kinds of Russian game companies. But nevertheless, through the sheer brilliance of this game, the game managed to slowly gain a foothold, to the point that they no longer want investors to interfere with their job. And the whole idea of the game is simple as that. The world that we live throughout the plague is nothing but the world that we have been living, but just we were not aware of. Essentially, what you might call to be the difference here is now the stakes become highlighted and become even more real, such that any deed that you can take or you didn't will completely affect your actions in the present, your actions in the future, and what you have in fact done in the past. So one of this genius's idea of this game is that if you do take certain kinds of actions, or you die, for example, but you can come back by plague doctors, the ramifications of those actions not only lead to certain kinds of punishments and constraints down the line, but also goes and change all of your saved games that you have done in the past. And it is fundamentally, I mean, in terms of ambience and enigma of what is a plagued world, this is, I would say, it's the gem.
Thank you, Reza. I mean,
I would like to have a very direct response to Reza. I don't know why, Reza, but recently I have been reading the text Jean-Luc Lancy wrote after his heart transplant. And when you were talking about it, Lintrus, I just remembered it. Recently, I'm revisiting the text a lot. And in that text, there's a very simple question Jean-Luc Lancy is asking. Why is this life proper? It is a matter of saving. And in that sense, maybe there is...
Sorry, you got cut off. Can you repeat it? Can you repeat it one more time? You got cut off a little bit.
Sure. What is this life proper that it is a matter of saving? In that sense, institutions, of course, they mostly define art after it is dead. And I completely agree with you. Sometimes gardening is much more necessary. But I was thinking, this is why like basic needs are very important, but also you said it in a very delicate way, because for me at the moment, it's only Monday and Sunday exist. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I don't have them. Either I'm in a mood to really have to do some paperwork or things like a Monday, manic Monday, Kate Pushy, or really Sunday that I really don't want to do anything. So the way we work is in a different rhythm, totally like how we sleep also, or how we live. This is why maybe the narcissism in art or the useless of art, because I'm thinking a lot about Richard Sennett, because funny enough, my flatmate recommended it to read back, and actually I really appreciate, because when you check the French translation, it is not the same. It is not craftsman, craftsmanship. It is artisan, and artisan has another name in this context. So suddenly fashion designers start to make masks, or we want to do useful things. Is this the question of narcissism is a little bit also relevant with the question of usefulness? Because actually I like art when it's not useful.
You see, I think that there is a vagueness about the question of usefulness versus uselessness. when we say that something is useless, for example, in art, or for example, even in literature or music, we mean it with regard to what you might call to be that kind of vulgar idea of use. That can be turned into certain kind of profit or other kinds, or kind of a very, what you might call to be an old-fashioned idea of something being pragmatic, something having a use value. But that does not render art useless in the fundamental sense. In fact, to inflate the concept of uselessness such that all apparitions of use will be taken from art, then you can actually say, then why? Why do I need to survive? To make art to begin with. So there is, in fact, a sort of implicit use. It's just that these uses are under different categories of use than the kind of use that we usually deal with crafts or instruments or, you know, basic tasks. Jason wants to say something.
Yes, Reza, to your point about the time capsule of human narcissism and use value, it started, you know, there's the famous saying by Hannah Arendt about the banality of evil, but she misses the reverse side, which is the evil of banality. And so what is the antidote to the evil of banality, which even the art world maybe has complicitly started participating in, increasingly, definitely. And I don't want to get into this because I'm going to sound antiquated when I romanticize the avant-garde's violence and the violence of decadent movements which roam the streets like gangs, not looking for communities or kind of humanistic associations, but looking to violate people's public tastes, because that was the only thing that could wrench you out of the ideological stupor and trance of fascism, you know, at the time. Is that's a problematic style, is a problematic sort of the highest order. And so, you know, there are two literary, sorry to go back to literature, but I couldn't help thinking when you were bringing up these captivating points, the difference, the diametrical sort of opposition between Gatsby and Ahab in American literature. So what is Gatsby? And they're both figures of spectacle who people sort of galvanize around and congregate around. Gatsby has nothing original, not a trace or sliver of originality. He's just the exaggerated sort of hyper performance or hyper simulation of existing trends. His fashion styles, his lavish parties, his mansion on the island, everything is a resemblance, but just elevated and irradiated of already pre-existing aristocratic and bourgeois modes, right? So he's a performer par excellence, and it's a beautiful sort of twist that only an imposter could be the ultimate aristocrat, or sort of, you know, in the capitalist era. But he's a fake through and through, and every detail is calculated and diabolically situated. And he sits sort of there, speaking of balconies, you know, he overlooks on his terrace the entire evening, these glamorous parties. That's pure instrumental aesthetics, where everyone is there at his parties in order to gain status, to gain luxury. It's about image and identity and all of that. And then you have Ahab, this grotesque, deformed sort of figure of piracy, who wants to lead a group of sailors into the bowels of the ocean and get them killed on a kind of sort of thing. And there's no reason on earth, there's no rational sort of use value category on earth why these sailors should follow him, except that he's described as irresistible and unstoppable. And that's a Deleuzian term, the unstoppable. And that even his deformities become a kind of wondrous magnetism, you know, which only happens in pirate culture, where scars and, you know, the sort of the one eye and the peg leg, they actually enhance your charismatic power. So here you have this guy who's taking them on a suicide mission into the blackest depths of the ocean, and they follow him. These are two different categories of seduction. I have to use a term, sort of, you know, that I don't actually mind. That I think that aesthetics or art, as well as philosophy, needs to gravitate more towards Ahab's form of sort of spontaneous seduction, rather than the sort of the Gatsby sort of prototype. And it would require something as fatal as something like Ahab's persona, I think, than sort of, because there is, I hate to put it this way too, but as much as I adore the art world and I spend as much time as I can circulating through it, there is a depletion of charismatic power in the art world, from its white wall galleries to its emails to its, and I know there's practical considerations there, but you know, we have to wonder whether or not that makes us sort of complicit with the conspiracy of disenchantment at the same time.
Well, thank you so much. But before, I think what's wrong with Time Capsule of Human Narcissism? I mean, there's something wrong with it, but like, history of art has been the history of time capsuling human narcissism, right? And with a comparative study of this, you can still learn. So, I mean, of course, first of all, not all art is a time capsule of human narcissism, but even at that very like basic level, there's something to be gained historically from looking at the evolution of this narcissism, this time capsule narcissism. I mean, that's the whole purpose of museums, you know.
Yes, no.
Can I say something, Mo? I mean,
yes, you and also like Jack Seberg joined us, which I'm so grateful he did, and I'm sure he has something to say about this as one of the great thinkers of art and someone I've been talking to.
May I excuse myself now?
Yeah, maybe listen to Simon because he's responding to you. And
okay, sure.
Yeah. So Reza and Jason, thank you both. A commonality between Ahab and Gatsby is they both have an interlocutor. Neither novel is written in the first person. You have Nick and you have, you know, so both heroes end up dead. One at the bottom of the ocean, his peg leg tied around the tail of the whale, the other in a swimming pool with no friends. They're both friendless at the end. Maybe the interlocutor is the curator. Maybe he's the museum director. Of course, I mentioned in the text that museums are about death. As Adnan knows, because Adnan shared time with me in New Zealand, I'm an expatriate New Zealander. I left New Zealand in the mid-90s, been in the world, back in the world, sitting in Vienna. You know, I showed rage in my last job as a museum director against neoliberal management culture, overarching pressure from government to reach ever broadening audiences and debase the principle. All that happened is that I lost my job. So rage in the museum led inevitably to death in the pool or at the bottom of the ocean with Gatsby or Jay Gats and with Captain Ahab, you know. So there's a very narrow,
Simon,
interlocutive divide between the theoretical domain, and maybe this is where there could be a theoretical crisis, because our ability to speak from a position of real world interlocution to overarching logics of power to do with funding and audience numbers and education and how many kids and all those things are being diminished. And, you know, whether couched in philosophical terms, literary terms, or even just brute terms of contemporary art has its own value, and we want our audiences to have that which they don't understand, and you can all stuff off, you know. Yeah.
Simon, may I ask you one question? It's very interesting that you say that, you know, the rage and museum don't go together. And coming back to the question of interlocutors that you brought up, but does this actually show that you lost interlocutor, or that museum was a facade upon certain kind of interlocutor that didn't even exist? Precisely because you can always go back to the people. Popularity without populism.
Yeah. So I had couched myself as interlocutor from the moment in the mid-90s when I learnt interlocution. You know, at the first stage of my career, I was doing French to English translation with the group, working with the post-structuralists, and, you know, and had a whole lot of highfalutin thoughts about what art and words and culture could mean. And I also thought contemporary art was rock and roll. And I kept that embedded in my personality in a way that missed the point about where neoliberal management culture and the museum had gone. So I can say I had a personal failure in recognizing the tidal shift of something just before Me Too, you know, like some sort of idea that I, you know, embodied something that had been lost from the system.
I see.
So
thank you.
Some of my rage could have been interpreted as the last stand of Ahab, you know, railing against that thing, because to look at me, I'm tallish, whitish. We talked about class earlier, upper classist, though I'm none of those things, but, you know, all of that is embodied in my physical person and in my education, and, you know, so I sort of, I missed those signs in and of myself in a mistaken way versus neoliberal, you know, and new century values, but I was coming from the right place, you know. So the two things couldn't match in the same way that Gatsby and Ahab speak across each other, even if they end up both dead in the ditch. I ended up dead in that ditch for speaking from a point of art as an embodiment of that which is best for our culture, but missed the signs of how that could be carried forward into the next phase of the century. And now I'm better at it, I guess, and hope in conversations like this to learn a new set of tools to be able to be rageful again in a way that will be read differently, you know. But in the end, being angry just was suffered by my kids losing significant income and having to rebuild. And we are rebuilding, we have rebuilt, but, you know, yeah, I became victim of a much larger machine. Not me personally, but the victimization was passed down, you know, with a removal of opportunity at an economic value for my children, you know. And nobody wants to talk about that, like getting actually pitched into the stuff that we all theorize, like, you know, there is, yeah, I was face down in the pool with Jay in my nice suit, you know, yeah.
Okay, so since Adnan is away for a second, maybe we should bring in Jack. We're on the topic. And Jack, would you like to speak? Do you want to, like, yes, there it is, you're unmuted. And then we can maybe go to Asli and Mona after Jack when Adnan is back. Go ahead.
Well, hi everybody, thanks for having me. I'm based in Rotterdam, an artist. I was fascinated and triggered by this this binary of outrage and rage, which is now unfolding in this discussion, which I think is really nice to have this idea of the artist figure as this border figure between society and between the romantic notion of being the full expression of human endeavor and such, those old, and which you also find back in the bourgeois and the artist elaboration that was made, and the pacification by neoliberalism and by the managerial bureaucracy that we live in. Was a very nice expose, the last one. You can really become, if you really let your rage go, you can become a victim of this system, and you will be kicked out and you will lose your position, which is a nice romantic position. But I think this is where the outrage and rage binary really can be something. Has to do with the performativity of the artist that remains, but at the moment the leveling is so total. I mean, the conditions for everybody become so heavy. Everybody becomes precarious at the moment. So the rage factor goes for everyone. It's like, it's not not only reserved for the artist, it's for everybody. Everybody should be outraged at this moment. So that's where the artist figure becomes leveled with everybody. It's like the most normal position actually, because precarity is everywhere at the moment. So
Zizek said it is too serious to panic. So we were not even allowed to panic. It was too serious to panic.
Yeah.
But I think it's a nice moment for like Jason was saying, to find again this element of rage, which is an existential rage rather than an outrage, which is constantly performed by artists. Indeed, we are the unacknowledged humanist defenders, so we can only be outraged. But there is a possibility for true rage now at this moment, in the sense that we are well in the same situation as everybody else, which gives an opportunity to re-enter the scene again. I would say, maybe. I don't know if this makes sense.
Of course it does.
So yeah, but at the moment we are in Rotterdam. We have the discussions now because everything is becoming so depleted. The crisis is becoming really harsh, and the last reserves of exceptionalism that we were floating or surviving on as artist class, they're becoming depleted now, truly. And then you find the exchange with the institutes becomes really political. Now the demand for the artists vis-a-vis the institutions that mediate or that how do you call it, distribute the last reserves, becomes really interesting. Now you get a new relation between the artist and the institute, which has to be reconfigured, because it was really building on existing patterns on which the artist was dependent on institutional distribution, which has to be rephrased.
Don't you think that the conditions are going to make the artists even more dependent on institutions?
Well,
artists are not as much in demand right now.
No, absolutely, but we're the lowest of the lowest at the moment, I would say. I think that's clear, and so the true demand will also become also visible in a sense. So we have to rebuild production in total, I would say, which is a task always. But I think there is a moment in which this is becoming very clear or very existential. So the outrage rage binary vis-a-vis the artist institutional or societal meaning becomes really expressed or acute now.
Thank you so much, Jack. You know, Joao has been logging in from New York. He's one of my other interlocutors about art. We've been working together. He's been teaching some seminars at the New Center, but also I just really love he's one of the active artists online. He's an artist that you can say has a Facebook practice like myself. And his specialty is playing with like emojis and those backgrounds and creating these wonderful things that look like a work of art. And they're really meaningful and funny, but he just knows how to use emojis on top of these particular Facebook backgrounds to create kind of really interesting and kind of like never have thought of situations. Sorry, Joao, I'm attracted to those. So do you want to talk about this problem of art? Am I putting you on spot? I really want to hear you, especially since you've been joining us, but very quietly at every session.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Thank you for the compliments, Mo, but nobody compares to you on social media. So I'm not gonna rank myself at that level. I guess would it be useful to speak about kind of like what's happening in New York on the ground? I mean, because it seems like most of the attendees here are based in Europe. So, I I guess like the relationship of understanding the relationship of the artist to institutions a bit different here, and particularly in New York, where there's essentially there has not been public provision for decades, and so it's a much different relationship that the artist has to the market. So in terms of like what gets wiped out, everything gets wiped out here sooner, almost immediately, and so I think in terms of like some of what's been brought up about outrage versus rage, there are no real support structures that are existing in a way that allows for that kind of galvanizing. I'm just thinking like what I'm bringing up is just some issues having to do with infrastructure and structures for organizing, and so it's very bleak here now, and I don't quite know. I don't quite know like how to kind of like connect the experience of the artist here, just because it's like a bomb has been dropped, and everybody I think is trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces, and I've been thinking about actually like the national politics here, and how it's becoming so impossible that nothing's short of like a secession between the states, where there's like a completely new state is like the answer, because I don't know if there's a way to kind of move forward with the United States as we know it. I don't know, like it's to me.
And you just became a citizen like less than a year ago. I became
a citizen a year ago. So, but I still have a Portuguese passport. So I'm also a citizen of the EU. So but I grew up in the States. So I'm American, and so I'm very kind of like rattled at the moment about the conditions here. So
I know you probably can't speak a lot, but you also get the pulse of the street, like the art world. What can you share with us from things you hear? What's going to happen in that sort of like private market based art world of New York, with all the galleries, the big galleries, the medium galleries, the small galleries, with like Pace just opened at like a skyscraper. I'm exaggerating, it's only 7th, 8th floor, but it feels like a really like vertical institution. You have like Zwirner, which is horizontal and is all over. What's going on with all these like people? What do you hear that the plans are really, like, you know?
I think I just read today that that because there's been such a great consolidation in terms of like the market power here. Yeah, there's the 3 or 4 galleries, but there's been like a certain amount of outreach to try to have these larger galleries begin to keep afloat some of the smaller galleries through online platforms. But this is all kind of a gesture. I don't know if it's based on anything that could like be a long-term solution to any of the problems that really need to be contended with. So I think the consolidation of power just mirrors kind of the consolidation that has happened at the corporate level, where there's only going to be like 3 retailers left after this. There's going to be like Walmart, Amazon, and Costco or something. So that's kind of like the hollowing out that everyone's been talking about under neoliberalism is just like it's basically a crater now. And moving forward, I don't know what it is. I mean, I think we can all sort of be like romantic and hope that our existential outrage will galvanize some kind of like groundswell. But I'm kind of a Marxist materialist. I'm like there is no like economic infrastructure that will be supporting anyone for the time being. So and so since that's not really there, hopefully that will begin to happen. But essentially, like the foundations here are using any money that would be used for artist grants at the moment to simply provide a lifeline, artist relief, and so there are these bridges, but these bridges are not leading to anywhere that's being imagined. Like the imaginary is not quite in place. So this all sounds very, again, grim and difficult, but I think that's kind of what I've gotten from speaking to people here and across the US.
So if smaller, medium galleries are closing and only like super big galleries and super blue chip continues to exist, in a way, I think public institutions that receive tax money or some kind of like a combination of tax and fundraising actually become more powerful in terms of determining the direction of art and careers, because they will become the only place where they can offer even more limited number of artists a kind of like visibility and a lifeline. So this is something that we really should think about, you know what I mean, role of public institution, because, you know, governments are not going to completely cut the art funding. They're not going to. And these museums already exist, and whether within their space or, as Boris was saying, as public art projects or like a combination of online public art, some limited so like physical attendance, but these institutions nevertheless are, and they're sort of like political, ideological, cultural direction, and what they want artists to do become even more important than before, because there's less private interest in art, basically, you know. And you have to become so big in order for you to be captured by, say, Pace. You know, I mean, look how many years and how many pieces Travel Paglan had to do for him to finally just be, I mean, poor Travel in a moment where like galleries are not having shows, but like just before this all started, you know what I mean? Trevor was signed to Pace, right? So, you know, you have to do so much to get into their sort of like lens. So these institutions, I think, become more powerful. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it would be good to hear from people, because art funding is not going to go down to zero from government. Jason, go ahead.
This is a fascinating discussion, but I would just want to challenge the dichotomy between what often gets framed as materialistic, practical sort of discussions of how art can survive, how things can survive sort of in institutional social frameworks, and then this idea of sort of these sort of the radical vanguard sort of visionary figure being a sort of transcendent. Not from where I come from or what I deal with. I deal with artists in totalitarian societies, and so I actually think people who, you know, the discussion of grants and inclusion and marginalization is far more abstract and metaphysical in a way, because it buys into the metaphysics of capital in order to participate in it. It buys into the metaphysics of capitalist society and the ideas of rights and the ideas of sort of, you know, of what sort of the human and all of that. When you know in a very flagrant sense that the state is absolutely antithetical to you, you know, and that you have zero expectation of mercy or compassion or support. So if you're, and I can give you the most practical historical examples of this, from avant-garde film movements that were underground to new poetry movements. Mohammed knows in Iran. I mean, you could never imagine an Iranian new poet thinking that a monarchy or a theocracy was going to give them a grant or have their back or give them a forum. And they were completely subterranean. I'm not romanticizing that, but that to me is even
they're just worried about getting arrested for what they had to write.
Arrested, tortured, or executed. There's your three options: arrested, tortured, and executed. That for me is a far more materialist and practical universe of the everyday than the one of social negotiation with liberal sort of economics and sort of capitalist modernity. That is this low intensity disaster. I wondered, and the challenge that, because Joel, you make wonderful points then, would it not be better maybe for us to just operate in the mindset of existing in a purely totalitarian condition? To just draw the sort of the lines of war in that sense.
Again,
I think
it's good for writers who can just print it on paper and give it away. Bad for installation artists who need space, money, projectors, cables, internet, this or that, in order to operate, right? So it's easy for you, or like, you know what I mean? This friend of mine, he's been doing this like crazy theater program in Tehran and in northern Iran. And they did like a really crazy thing of like Life of Marx, but they actually casted a woman who acted as Marx, as if Marx was a woman. they did this incredible sort of like Rosa Luxemburg. They just shot like a whole theatrical movie on Rosa Luxemburg. I mean, I worry for him because they're gonna arrest him. You know what I mean? And he completely operates in the space you're talking about. Like no grant, of course. Are you kidding me? Do you think Iranian government will give money for someone to cast a woman as Marx? But yeah, so I see him do that, right? But again, he's only working on a very small scale. You know what I mean? He's not getting like the city theater or like a, you know what I mean? Like Friedrich Palace. No, his audience is like 50, 80 people, small, very small space, you know, often like a garage of a friend. The productions are really good, right? But sometimes the scale of art requires, you know, this type of like negotiation, even with evil governments. You know, I mean, some artists in Iran, even with this theocracy we have in Iran, are still working with the Museum of Contemporary Art in Tehran because that's all they have, you know. So it's like, I'm not trying to like say you're wrong, Jason, but I think when it comes, but it's a point about Reza, you know, complexity of art, especially contemporary art today, requires sort of like putting these demands to the new liberal state. It's just unfortunate. Maybe we should we should make like miniature installations where you kind of look at it with like magnifying glass.
I would say too quick, does the virtual solve that problem?
I'm gonna let Adnan come in. Go ahead.
I am always a little bit concerned about if it becomes more not explaining but mansplaining kind of. I want to keep the momentum together. I see Enda making very good comments. Yeah. Could we have Enda with us, because on the side Enda is really making nice. I mean, our side conversations are pretty cool too. Hi, how are you doing? Do you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to put stuff because I didn't want to be lurking too much, and not saying anything. And I don't have much more to say beyond what I guess I was saying in those comments. But I guess 2 points that I always sort of struggle with, and I guess my background is I'm now an art student, and I studied philosophy before, and I also do a lot of political stuff outside of art, and I kind of, you know, I always struggle with the need to make this kind of this idea of care infrastructure something that exists only within the space of art, and the way in which artists talk about themselves as a community, as independently of society. And I think that this is kind of an effect of a specific, like a kind of specialization and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't really expecting to talk, so now I kind of, it's easier for me to type things. But yeah, I think just, yeah, this idea of, like, I really like this idea of a militant kind of subjectivity as well. I totally agree with what Jason was saying. I mean, I don't anticipate having a future within the art world, or I try not to, and I don't therefore generate the expectation that like comes with certain kind of commitments to like behaving in certain ways and being rewarded for that. And I think, you know, and in that way, I'm also not invested in this kind of separate future art world, which has to like persist in like continuity with its current form, which I think is like really kind of quite damaging to the possibility of making art as a kind of autonomous or like useful thing. You know, I think it has to be born of some kind of struggle and stuff like this. So yeah, I mean, I think I can appreciate the kind of critiques of that, which might be that it is somehow naive or like kind of maybe like overly romantic, but you know, at the same time, I think there's like Jason was saying, like a hugely pragmatic dimension, and also like it's just a constraint or like a necessary condition that a lot of artists also have to deal with, and we need to kind of be wary of that if we are to conceive of ourselves as a kind of community, right? So yeah, that would be all I'd have to add.
Can we kind of go before and after, kind of two different profiles? Like before we had this immediate laptop artist who could do an immediate presentation and can fly wherever for a new commission or project, almost like a good business plan. You need a residency, you need few biennials, you need a good gallery. Like there was a career plan, business plan, which is clear rather than a romantic talent. But in this case, maybe because we lose so much different forms of possibilities in this transition, is it also the militant? I'm thinking through the militant now, because this militant subjectivity could be also hijack a lot of resources, right? And can redefine. So maybe it is not a carrier anymore. It's not a promise at all. And it is not maybe bringing you a bright future. As Enda said, it was very clear. I'm not planning to earn money, at least. It looks like the future is not going to bring me much at the moment. How would we sustain these practices? I think it is as relevant as also asking the memory from the past generations, because it really concerns me every day, sudden loss of many people. How we can sustain these structures together? Like also, Jason, how can we elaborate on militant subjectivity? Because can we apply on it in today's reality?
I'm not going to say anything because it's going to be mansplaining, right? So I'm just zipped up.
It's a fascinating question. I think we have a tendency to, speaking to when Reza said human narcissism, I think that we all in the artistic, philosophical, intellectual, creative, literary worlds, we always think we're living at the worst time, you know, in history, sort of. That it's the decline, that it's a disenchantment. You know, you can read classical poets from the medieval era, and they're saying the same things we are now. You know, they're starved, they're marginalized, they're unrecognized. You know, at best, people behold them with indifference, and at worst, they're subject to the most authoritarian things. I think it's a matter of perception. What you asked there. If you think you're in war, you're in war. You know, Nietzsche even says in peace times, a warlike person goes to war with themselves. We just have to decide this is combative. I think that's the all or nothing sort of extremity. When you say militancy, that's the rebel's posture, the true rebel's posture. And so, yes, so which means then these kind of halfway existences, the subsistence level, sort of living off the beggar's plate of systems might be something that we have to forsake. The question too, at the aesthetic level, nobody likes to talk about content these days, is whether the art's better under totalitarianism. And I hate to give you an example, but Reinaldo Arenas, the great Cuban gay writer, spent years in prisons in sort of on Castro's island, writing stunning, gorgeous volumes, one after another, thinking that he was in pure hell with his subterranean enclaves of other outlawed writers. And then he went to New York City and he said, my God, this is the real nightmare. He finally escaped to say, this is much worse, because they don't have a goddamn thing to say, because they're halfway between sort of acceptance and exclusion. And at least we knew who we were there. We were the enemy, we were the wretched, and we had this aristocratic sense. And when you wrote a poem in 1960s or 70s Cuba, like Arenas, and you read it to your community or your crew or your gang that night, it had to be good, because you were risking your mortal existence to read those words, and they were risking theirs too, in this knife's edge, delicate balance, just to hear a few forbidden words. So the craft was intense and refined and elegant. And I hate to be I'm not being an apologist for totalitarian sort of governments in this regard, but inadvertently, I think that pressure. So I think we're in it. It's just we've been taught not to perceive it that way. And so maybe we should go back and saying, revert to the perception that we are in a deeply totalitarian atmosphere. It might help us creatively.
There are two things. Firstly, I publicly apologize, Mohammed. He's of course offended. I could be sometimes very direct and blunt, and I'm trying to hold basically two different scenes together and gender balance the situation. I broke my dear friend's heart, so I would definitely apologize from more. But at the same time, if Egemen is there with us, I would like to go back with you with this balance and content, because I know that we discuss a lot about what kind of content is available and what kind of content is going to be relevant, but also
are we continuously producing content? What's going to happen with the form? What is going to happen with the vertical understanding of creativity, not horizontally always laying down all the references on the table, but maybe it is the time to create more like a virtual split in our understanding and learning. How would you react? Because you also think a lot about, I mean, things like Google. One of your works is exactly measuring the space these little ads cover on our screen, and then how their attention is economically also stealing our brain, like we mostly miss our pre-internet brain. In this quarantine, there was a lot of space. As much as being connected to internet, there was also a lot of space for me to escape from internet. So please take over.
Yeah, I think in regards to content and form, this is actually a discussion in art, right? We have been, in the recent years, artists have been seen as more as the content providers for exhibitions. And I think when we are, through institutions' existence online, we are forced into this economy through social media and other places. We are basically competing with image and text that is particularly designed to catch the attention. And of course, the gaze is different. So this is why maybe that somehow relates to why do we need institutions? That because the fact that I'm looking at a screen is much more different than going inside an art exhibition. But when regarding form, like I want to just make a quick reminder about touch on the notion of rage. I think reacting to rage or like art of doom, in that sense, is still reacting to now. And when reacting to the status quo or the state of things. And I think art provides a lot of potential in its history to actually go beyond that. And this is primarily a question of form. We can stop, we can go into a kind of a time of proposals instead of looking at how things are at the moment. And this we can do through form. So I think in this tension between content and form in art opens these kind of possibilities, and to really think about now, not through looking at what's at stake, but looking at what could be proposed. So I think this is the necessity of a formal turn, I would say. You guys are muted.
Adnan, you're muted.
Okay, now do you hear me? Mo, thank you for coming back.
It's okay. I basically lost signal for a second, and I was chatting with Simon because he also lost signal and he was telling me some stuff about the conversation. Sorry about that. But him and I just both lost signal for a second, and I had to go call him because we're working on like this Moscow project and all that. So I apologize.
That's all good. Then from form and content, I want to go more into functionality, because the theaters, like the actors, they can produce audiobooks, or maybe other sectors going to open up new fields for them and new economies. We all know that things are going to change. I want to talk with Cagla about, she had 8 years working in a theater company, in an institution that prepares program for theaters. And of course, theater is something that you did based on audience circulation, but a lot of them also continue, not necessarily with online solutions. So in this respect, not only about balancing form and content, but also I think the function of publicness is going to change. Like
Cagla, are you there? Yes. From theater perspective, we didn't have anything from theater perspective, and you have a lot of experience with theater, you know. How would you react? What are the things people in the theater world has been talking about? Because how is making a lot of online content, yes, but what is the organization going on?
How was always an experimental avant-garde stage, so it's kind of not a moment that they are experiencing it for the first time. So they switched immediately as the first stage to the program what they were already planning. So one day after, on at the weekend on the 13th and 14th, they had a very incredible program, which was kind of dealing also with these teams without knowing that. So they have immediately put the content on the digital stage. But in the cases like the state theaters, in those like the Deutsches Theater, Volksbühne, Maxim Gorki Theater, which I was also working till the end of last month. It's like a discussion since years, since I had been working there. It was always the idea, how can we move in the digital era with our very statical idea of aesthetics, because this theater stage leaps from the stage, and actually it depends very on this one-to-one connection with the audience. So I find it very interesting what Egemen said. Egemen said the exhibition space is killed or something like that. Like it always came to me, and I have the feeling that now the theater stage is going to be so lively as it never was, because me feeling as a part of the theater in the last 10 years, I couldn't watch any of this digital stuff. And I was very upset because I wanted to watch the Peter Stein from Schaubühne, which I never had the opportunity to see it, but I couldn't, because I couldn't watch it in this digital space. It's very quadratic, and I couldn't have any connection. But I thought, okay, you're such an old-minded ex-theater worker, so you can't imagine that you have a new way of connecting with this stage. So that was from my side, like looking on how this big institutions, like state institutions, who were not ready for this digital era, struggling with putting the content, which was not also seen for this digital era, into this consumption time. So if we see it as the contemporary art and the performance, contemporary art has reacted in another professional way, but the theaters are kind of still trying to think about it, how they are going to produce digital input for this next era. So that's my personal and professional view.
And it looks like definitely touching is going to change, because I mean, recently at Art Forum, Paul Preciado wrote an excellent text, very personal, very reflective, but there you could find a kind of definition of how we are going to shift in the way we will miss each other, we will touch each other, or maybe because of all this viral age coming, how we have completely defined the understanding of intimacy in a completely different mental space. So departing from there is things like touching or experiencing with not only objects, also like in terms of social engaged art. Simon, you also organize a lot of stuff like this, I know. How are we going to redefine touching, feeling, and senses? Like, is it a good space to think how to touch in the art context? Is it a good question? Do you think, can we redefine touching, hands and eyes, again. Maybe this is going holes in our body, or all the liquids in our body. Are we going to redefine this relationship with the word again?
I mean, I think there was a previous crisis related to the HIV/AIDS crisis of the, if we want to put a period on it, late 80s into the 90s. You know, when people like Dragset and Elmgren in the mid 90s did a version of Marcel Duchamp's toilet kind of in the middle of gallery space, and actually invited people to use it, you know. And we understood the crisis of human liquidity at that moment before, and we somehow all came through it, yeah? And we returned to normal. Of course, the touch and stuff Adnan was relating to is in my museum practice. I've done a lot with blind and deaf people where you produce special objects to make sure that deaf people can hear through words and blind people can touch to understand the visual. And maybe it's going to be a case where we all need 3D printers. Maybe there has to be the care state related to the body in a new way. Because at the moment, the care state for the body is only related to health, yeah? And a small specialized portion for the blind, the deaf, the mute, or people with different challenges of mobility. So maybe we have to look at a broader spectrum of care. And the fact, and somebody said before, maybe curators or museum professionals are going to become nurses, and the bedrock of curating returns to the first root of the Latin Greek word, you know. And so maybe we do have to think about that. Adnan, thank you for that question, you know, because we are actually careful people, yeah. I miss all the things that you refer to in terms of social space, you know. The idea of an elbow bump is not very satisfying.
I mean, I agree with you. It came out at a kind of space that we were kind of, we went through this, you're right.
Yeah.
But also this time the film stopped with the point with VR. So
yeah. Yeah,
yes
and you
no, you know,
yes,
yes
yeah,
and no.
So at the very beginning, at 5 o'clock, you said one thing that I understood that you did from your time in New Zealand related to Māori and Pacific culture was sharing. And the sharing important to Polynesian cultures is not actually the sharing like the Greeks of the sound to the air. It's actually the sharing of the breath. It's before the word. So the thing that you share is you greet by actually touching noses or different versions of that. The thing you share together is predates I am, or the, you know, that moment.
We breathe the same air. This whole
yeah,
thing.
you breathe the same air.
You say we breathe the same air, which is true.
Exactly.
You come close and the
Yeah,
noises face each other, and we breathe this. Yes, there is no other climate. We are all in this.
There is
climate.
no, yeah. So that climate is lost to us. So the culture of the world is diminished by some proportion in the idea that humanity exists without a whole cultural realm based upon that idea of closeness, you know. And it's not a realm embodied in Western contemporary art culture, but it is an embodied realm that belongs to a part of the globe which more people should value, because it expresses a closeness outside of regulated familial bonds and outside of sex, you know. And that is a diminishment of humanity for us all. And if we can be the careful people that find ways to overcome that diminishment, then we are good people, you know. And I think that this conversation is about that sort of striving. I hope, you know. Thank you, Adnan, for that question.
There are still some people I see online. If are there more comments coming from people who are deciding to be silent? I would like to extend the conversation or close. We are at a kind of pretty good 3.5 hours marathon with a lot of ups and downs, with a lot of extensions, with a lot of new and interesting directions. It's actually like how Marta says, I was very excited to see you all 4 days, and I felt very comfortable at home. But actually now after this, I am also a bit disappointed because it's not the same as having you all at Art Space in New Zealand or Kunsthaus Stuttgart or in any other art institutions. I believe in art institutions. I work for art institutions, and I believe in education and learning too. So yes, I agree with Marta. I agree with 3 years old Marta that it is a bit disappointing at the end of the day to Zoom your friends or to hold all the discussions all the time online. I think this physicality is bringing, these new forms of communication is bringing a lot of complexities, as I experienced myself a lot, but also this new the physicality and being in the same room. I somehow miss it. This would be the only final statement I would say.
Thank you, Adnan. What should we do? I think we should just close, right? Say goodbye. Well, it's been what, 3.5 hours, right? Longer than our normal sessions. Thank you so much for putting your time aside and joining us, especially given the fact that this is a volunteer labor that you are performing, and there's no artist fee, there's no speaker fee. You just give your intellect, your time, your energy to everyone who came today. It was a really like busy day. And also like, yeah, Adnan has this like particular ability to kind of like throw people off the center. Like he kind of like exercised it in our first session a little bit. He exercised it twice today. So I guess we love him for that, right? And yeah, also Cagla, it's very nice. You live down the street from me, right? So we're finally hanging out. Like you literally like 2-minute walk from me, right? So it's amazing to kind of like gather. And also Jason, thank you so much. This is like your 3rd week in a row. And just wanted to like add this at the end that we're going to announce this tomorrow, but Jason has joined us, New Center, as the programmer of disciplinary studies. So you're going to see a lot of really good people that Jason's going to bring into New Center to teach for us. And yeah, I hope that we can I really hope that New Center can live this crisis, because this is like a very fundamental, like societal, civilizational, economic, political crisis. And really the only thing that makes me a little bit nervous these days is like the future, but particularly future of this fragile institution that with the help of a lot of people, including Reza and a lot of our instructors, board members like Daphne Ayas, and tons of other people, we've built as a form of like as an school for artists, but not necessarily an art school where you learn like material practice. New Center is a place where artists come to kind of like enrich their understanding of the world, what they're doing, philosophy, and all sorts of stuff. So it's like a supplementary to art school kind of education. New Center is a kind of place where you come to kind of like grab new ideas, network, and we've been online from the day one, right? So it's kind of first week or two, it was kind of exciting for us because we thought, oh wow, because we thought it's going to be short. So we're like, oh wow, we've always been online. We're going to cope with this, right? And now that the crisis is kind of like settling and deepening, it's kind of like those question comes up, you know, like with all these like changes, how are we going to like maneuver and survive through this? But having friends like you, having an international network of really interesting people around the world who support us, I think it's possible if we work closer, it's possible to not only save New Center, which is like a very small initiative, but much larger projects like contemporary art or like contemporary philosophy or theater. Anyways, thank you so much for your time, and thank you, Adnan, for co-hosting. This is very stressful with all the stuff.
It is beautiful. I mean, it is a very long dedication to listen to each other, but I need to digest. We all need to digest. But there were very sharp
exchanges.
Input. Bravo, really. I really appreciate everyone. Thank you for
Thanks
your
to
time. Behind me, it was Billy Apple called Basic Needs. Really, we need to work on basic needs. Leave no one behind, it writes at Temple of Fairfield on a very beautiful roof. I don't know how these guys go on top of that building and write, leave no one behind. Let's remember that tag, basic needs for everyone, water, food, water, shelter, clothing, and hygiene, and love.
Thanks. See you guys soon. I just wanted to at the end remind you that we'll be doing these 3 awesome weeks of programming with Simon and with Cosmosco Foundation that begins May 13, May 20, and May 27th. Really interesting conversation we're hoping, which will basically be some of the themes today, but we're trying to stay away from COVID in it. So it's interesting to see how artists and curators come together without talking about the elephant in the room, but kind of talking about the elephant in the room. Anyways, thanks again. See you soon. Bye-bye.